The entire town of Millbrook gathered that morning, their laughter echoing through the Carolina hills as they watched Caleb Warren drag a rusted, rotting train car onto his grandfather's abandoned land. "Old fool's finally lost it," they whispered. But 6 months later, those same people would stand in line, tears in their eyes, begging to see what he'd created inside that forgotten relic. Stay with me until the end of this incredible transformation and comment below which city you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story has traveled. The factory whistle hadn't blown for 3 years, but Caleb Warren still woke at 4:47 every morning, his body trained by 30 years of shifts that no longer existed. In the darkness of his Detroit apartment, he'd lie there, listening to the silence where Margaret's breathing should have been feeling the cold space where her warmth had lived for 28 years. The cancer had taken her 14 months ago, but the apartment still smelled like her lavender hand cream still held her voice in the walls. At 52, Caleb had become a ghost haunting his own life. The apartment itself was dying around him, water stains spreading across the ceiling like cancer cells, paint peeling away in long strips that reminded him of shed snakeskin. The landlord had stopped returning calls months ago. Everyone in the building knew it was only a matter of time before the eviction notices came. Detroit was full of buildings like this, full of people like him, remnants of an America that had promised prosperity and delivered abandonment. "You need to eat something, Cal," his neighbor Rosa would say, leaving plates of food outside his door that he'd find hours later cold and congealed. Margaret wouldn't want you living like this. But what did the dead want? What did they care about the shambling remains of the living? The bills had become a mountain on the kitchen table, unopened envelopes breeding in white drifts. Final notice. Past due. Urgent. He'd stopped opening them after Margaret's funeral. What was the point? The factory pension had been raided by corporate restructuring. The life insurance had gone to medical bills. He had $3,847 in the bank, and a body that ached in ways that reminded him he wasn't young anymore, wasn't useful anymore, wasn't anything anymore. It was a Tuesday night in November when everything changed. Unable to sleep, Caleb sat at the ancient desktop computer Marcus had set up years ago, back when his son still called, still visited, still considered him a father worth knowing. The blue light of the screen was the only illumination in the apartment as he mindlessly scrolled through Craigslist, not looking for anything in particular, just needing to feel connected to a world that continued spinning without him. That's when he saw it. For sale. 1923 Pullman railway car. Needs work. $700. Must move immediately. The single photograph was grainy, taken at dusk, showing a hulking shadow of rust and broken windows. To anyone else, it would have looked like tetanus waiting to happen, like a decent spot for teenage drinking or homeless camps. But Caleb saw something else. He saw possibility. He saw escape. He saw a project that might fill the endless hours between now and whenever his heart decided to stop. He clicked on the listing. The seller was in Ohio, about 3 hours away. The description was sparse. Inherited from uncle. Sitting on property for 40 years. Buyer must arrange transport. Cash only. No tire kickers. Caleb stared at that photo for an hour, maybe two. The train car sat there like a wounded animal, abandoned and forgotten, but still somehow maintaining a dignity in its decay. It had been something once. It had carried people to destinations, to new lives, to hopes and dreams. Now it was nothing just like him. "What the hell?" he whispered to the empty room. "What the hell?" He called the number the next morning. The voice on the other end belonged to a man named Eugene, gruff and impatient. "You actually want this thing?" Eugene asked, disbelief coloring his tone. "You know it's just sitting in a field, right? Hasn't moved since the 70s. Probably got animals living in it." "I want it," Caleb said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "Your funeral, buddy. When can you get here?" "This weekend. Bring cash. And a way to move it. I'm not helping with that." The drive to Ohio was the furthest Caleb had been from Detroit in 5 years. His pickup truck, a 1998 Ford that Margaret had called Old Blue, wheezed and rattled, but kept moving forward. The radio didn't work anymore, so he drove in silence, watching the industrial decay of Michigan give way to the flat farmland of Ohio. Eugene's property was 40 acres of neglect, accessed by a dirt road that hadn't seen maintenance since the Clinton administration. The house was a ramshackle thing that looked like it was held together by spite and duct tape. Eugene himself matched the property weathered-worn, suspicious of outsiders. "There she is," Eugene said, gesturing with a beer can toward the back field. "Hope you brought a trailer." Caleb walked through the tall grass, each step sending up clouds of grasshoppers. The train car sat at the edge of the property like a beached whale rust, eating through its sides windows, either broken or opaque with decades of grime. But the structure was intact. The bones were good. "Why 700? Caleb asked. Eugene shrugged. "That's what I need for my truck payment. You want it or not?" Caleb paid in cash, counting out the bills from an envelope that had once held Margaret's funeral program. Eugene didn't offer to help as Caleb assessed the logistics of moving a 60-foot train car. It would cost another $2,000 to transport it, money he barely had. But standing there in that Ohio field with the November wind cutting through his jacket, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in 14 months. Purpose. The transport company he hired was run by two brothers who specialized in moving unusual loads. They'd relocated everything from carnival equipment to Cold War missiles. A train car was nothing special to them. "Where are we taking this rust bucket?" the older brother Tommy asked. "North Carolina," Caleb said. "Place called Millbrook, about an hour outside Asheville." "That's a haul. You got property there?" "My grandfather did. Left it to me when I died. Never been there." Tommy raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. In their business, you learned not to ask too many questions. The journey took 3 days. Caleb followed the transport truck in Old Blue, watching his train car sway gently on the massive trailer. They stopped at truck stops where people gathered to stare and take pictures. Kids pressed their faces against car windows as they passed on the highway. The train car was a curiosity, a relic from another time being dragged into the present. "What you planning to do with it?" a trucker asked at a rest stop in West Virginia. "Live in it," Caleb said. The trucker laughed, thinking it was a joke. Caleb didn't correct him. The property in Millbrook had been in Caleb's family for 4 generations, but he'd never seen it. His grandfather, Walter Warren, had bought it in 1947 with money saved from his work on the railroad. 40 acres of mountain land, mostly forested with a creek running through the eastern corner. Walter had planned to build a house there, start a new life after the war, but he'd never left Detroit. The dream had calcified into deed paperwork that passed from father to son like an unread letter. The dirt road leading to the property was worse than Eugene's. Tree branches scraped against the transport truck like fingernails on a chalkboard. Tommy cursed creatively as he navigated ruts that could swallow a small car. But finally, after what felt like hours of crawling through the forest, they reached the clearing. It was smaller than Caleb had imagined, maybe 2 acres of relatively flat land surrounded by towering pines and oak trees. The remains of a foundation sat at the northern edge, Walter's unfinished dream. Tall grass and wildflowers had claimed the rest, except for a small area where someone had once parked vehicles, the earth still too compressed and oil-stained for much to grow. "This where you want it?" Tommy asked, gesturing to the old parking area. Caleb nodded. He watched as the brothers operated their equipment with practiced efficiency, hydraulic lifts and winches, working in concert to slide the train car off the trailer and onto the ground. It settled with a groan that seemed to come from deep within its metal bones, as if it was sighing after a long journey. "You sure about this?" Tommy asked as Caleb handed over the transport fee. "Nearest neighbor's got to be a mile away. No power lines I can see. You're pretty much on your own out here." "That's the idea," Caleb said. After the brothers left, Caleb stood alone in the clearing with his train car. The silence was different here than in Detroit. Their silence was the absence of life. No children playing, no workers coming home, no factories producing. Here, the silence was full of small sounds, birds calling leaves, rustling the creek, babbling in the distance. Life continuing its ancient patterns, indifferent to human grief. He walked around the train car, running his hands along its rusted sides. Up close, he could see its history written in dents and scratches, in the ghosts of painted letters that had once announced its routes and destinations. The Pullman company had built these cars in the golden age of rail travel when crossing the country by train was an adventure, not an anachronism. The door was stuck rusted shut after decades of neglect. Caleb retrieved a crowbar from his truck and worked at it, rust flakes falling like red snow. When it finally gave way with a shriek of protesting metal, he was hit by a wave of musty air that smelled of decay and animal habitation. The interior was worse than he'd expected. The seats had long since rotted away, leaving only metal frames. The floor was covered in debris leaves, animal droppings, the skeletons of small creatures that had crawled in to die. Water damage had warped the ceiling and several panels had fallen completely. Graffiti covered most surfaces, decades of teenage declarations and crude drawings. A rational person would have seen a hopeless cause. Caleb saw a beginning. He made camp that first night with a sleeping bag in the bed of his truck, too exhausted to drive back to town for a motel. The temperature dropped into the 30s and he lay there shivering, looking up at stars he hadn't seen since childhood. In Detroit, light pollution had erased the night sky. Here, the Milky Way stretched across the darkness like a river of light. Margaret would have loved this, he thought, then pushed the thought away. That way led to the abyss. The next morning, he drove into Millbrook proper. It was the kind of small southern town that existed in a permanent state of almost dead, almost alive, almost forgotten, almost remembered. The main street had more empty storefronts than occupied ones. A dollar store, a diner, a hardware store that looked like it hadn't updated its inventory since the Reagan years. At the hardware store, a man who introduced himself as Earl looked at Caleb's list with increasing skepticism. "You building a bunker or something?" Earl asked. "Renovating an old train car," Caleb said. Earl's eyebrows shot up. "You're the fellow bought the old Warren property. Heard you dragged some rust heap up there." News traveled fast in small towns. Caleb had been in Millbrook less than 24 hours, and already he was a subject of discussion. "That's me," Caleb said. "Walter Warren's kin. My grandfather." Earl's expression softened slightly. "Good man, Walter. Used to send money back here during the Depression, kept half the town fed. Shame he never made it back." "You knew him." "My daddy did. Said Walter always talked about building something special on that land. Guess it runs in the family." Caleb loaded his truck with supplies, cleaning materials, basic tools, a generator, fuel cans. The bill came to $487, a significant chunk of his remaining funds, but Earl threw in a pair of work gloves and a thermos for Walter's grandson. Back at the property, Caleb began the monumental task of cleaning. He started by removing the large debris, hauling out rotted wood and rusted metal. A family of possums had nested in what had once been a luggage compartment. They hissed at him indignantly before waddling away into the forest. The work was harder than anything he'd done in years. The factory had been repetitive but not physically demanding. This was different. Every muscle ached. His hands, soft from months of inactivity, quickly developed blisters that burst and bled. But the pain felt good, felt real, felt like something other than the numb grief that had become his constant companion. On the third day, while clearing debris from under one of the bench frames, his hand hit something solid. He pulled out a metal box, rusted but intact. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a collection of items that must have been hidden there decades ago. A pocket watch still ticking impossibly after all these years. A photograph of a young couple standing in front of a train car, much like this one, and a leather journal, its pages yellowed but readable. The journal's first entry was dated June 15, 1923. "Today I begin my career with the Pullman Company. Mother wept, saying I was abandoning the family farm. But I see the future rushing toward us on steel rails, and I intend to ride it to wherever it leads." Caleb sat in the ruins of the train car and read the journal cover to cover. The author was James Morrison, a young porter who had worked this very car during its active years. His entries detailed the passengers he'd served, oil barons and immigrants, musicians and con men, families heading west to start new lives, soldiers returning from war. The train car had been a vessel for thousands of stories, thousands of dreams. The final entry was dated December 3, 1941. "War is coming. I can feel it in the air, see it in the faces of the passengers. This old car has carried so many to their destinies. Now I must find mine. If someone finds this journal, know that this car was more than metal and wood. It was hope on wheels. May it be so again." Caleb looked around the devastated interior with new eyes. This wasn't just any train car. This was a piece of history, a carrier of dreams. And somehow through a chain of coincidences or fate, It had come to him at the moment he needed it most. That afternoon, a pickup truck rumbled up the dirt road. Caleb tensed, not ready for visitors, not ready to explain himself to skeptical locals. But the man who got out was smiling, carrying a six-pack of beer and a toolbox. "Name's Mike," he said, extending a hand. "I own the property next to yours about a mile through those trees. Heard you were working on something interesting up here." "News travels fast," Caleb said. "Not much else to talk about in Millbrook. Mind if I take a look?" Mike walked around the train car with the eye of someone who knew construction. He knocked on support beams, examined the wheel. Assemblies ran his hand along the roofline. "The bones are good," he said finally. "Better than I expected. You planning to restore it?" "Planning to live in it," Caleb said. Mike nodded as if this was perfectly reasonable. "My grandfather lived in a converted barn for 10 years. Said it was the happiest time of his life. You need any help, you let me know. I've got tools you can borrow, and my nephew's good with electrical if you decide to run power up here." After Mike left, Caleb stood in the gathering dusk, beer in hand, looking at his train car. For the first time since Margaret's death, he felt the stirring of something that might have been hope, or at least the absence of despair, which was close enough. Over the next weeks, Caleb fell into a routine. Wake at dawn, not from habit now, but from purpose. Coffee boiled on a camp stove. Then work until his body couldn't continue. The cleaning phase took 2 weeks. He borrowed a pressure washer from Mike and watched decades of grime slide away, revealing the train car's original dark green paint in patches. The structural work was more challenging. Several floor joists had rotted through and needed replacement. Caleb had never done this kind of work, but YouTube videos on his phone and advice from Mike got him through. Each successfully completed repair felt like a small victory against entropy. The roof was the biggest challenge. Years of water damage had compromised several sections. Caleb spent 3 days on top of the car, removing damaged panels, treating rust, and installing new metal sheeting. The work was precarious. One slip would mean a 15-foot fall, but the danger made him feel alive in a way he hadn't in months. Neighbors began stopping by, curious about the man who thought he could turn a rust heap into a home. Some came to mock but stayed to help when they saw Caleb's determination. Tom, a retired electrician, offered advice on wiring. Sarah, who ran the diner in town, brought sandwiches and stayed to help sand window frames. Even the skeptics found themselves drawn into the project. "It's like a barn raising," Sarah said one afternoon, watching a group of locals helping to install insulation. "Haven't seen the community come together like this in years." But not everyone was supportive. Carl Davidson, who owned most of the commercial property in Millbrook, drove up one afternoon in his pristine Range Rover. He walked around the train car with the expression of someone examining a particularly offensive piece of garbage. "You know there are zoning laws," he said. "This eyesore isn't up to code. I could have the county shut you down." "It's my property," Caleb said evenly. "My grandfather's property." "Your grandfather was smart enough to leave this place. You should follow his example." After Davidson left, Mike spat tobacco juice and shook his head. "Don't mind him. He's been trying to buy up property around here for years, wants to develop some kind of resort. Your grandfather never would sell to his father, and it still sticks in his craw." The first night Caleb slept in the train car was 6 weeks after he'd arrived in Millbrook. He'd installed a wood stove for heat, patched the major holes, and built a simple platform bed. It was far from finished, but it was shelter. He lay in his sleeping bag, listening to the rain on the metal roof, feeling the train car rock slightly in the wind, as if remembering its traveling days. He dreamed of Margaret that night. She was sitting across from him in a restored passenger car, sunlight streaming through clean windows, the landscape rushing by outside. She didn't speak, just smiled and held his hand. When he woke, his face was wet with tears, but for once, they didn't feel like drowning. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. A boy, maybe 10 years old, stood at the edge of the clearing, staring at the train car with wide eyes. He was skinny, clothes a bit too small, with the watchful expression of a child who'd learned not to trust easily. "You lost?" Caleb asked. The boy shook his head. "I wanted to see the train. Everyone's talking about it." "What's your name?" "Trevor." "Well, Trevor, would you like a tour?" The boy's face lit up. He explored the train car with the enthusiasm only children can muster, asking 1,000 questions. Where did it come from? How old was it? Did it really use to carry people across the country? My mom says you're crazy, Trevor said matter-of-factly. Living in a rusty old train. Maybe I am, Caleb said. But sometimes crazy's better than ordinary. Trevor became a regular visitor, showing up after school and on weekends. He helped with small tasks, sorting screws, sanding, wood painting sections of the interior. In return, Caleb told him stories from James Morrison's journal, Tales of the Golden Age of Rail Travel. Did you know, Caleb said one afternoon as they worked on installing shelves, that this very car once carried President Coolidge says so right here in the journal. Morrison served him coffee at 3 a.m. as they crossed the Rockies. Really? Trevor's eyes widened. Really? This old car has more history than most museums. Trevor's mother, Ellie, eventually came looking for her son. She was young, maybe 30, with the tired eyes of someone working multiple jobs to keep afloat. She stood at the door of the train car, clearly prepared to grab her son and leave. I'm sorry if he's been bothering you, she said. No bother at all, Caleb said. He's good company. Good help, too. She looked around the interior, which was slowly transforming from ruins to living space. Caleb had installed pine paneling on some walls, built kitchen cabinets from reclaimed wood, created a small library area with shelves made from old railroad ties. You did all this yourself, she asked. Had help from neighbors. Your son's been part of the crew. Trevor beamed with pride. Mom, look what I painted. He pointed to a section of wall he'd carefully covered in forest green. Ellie's expression softened. It's beautiful, baby. She turned to Caleb. Thank you for being kind to him. His father, well, it's just us now. He doesn't have many positive male figures in his life. He's welcome here any time, Caleb said. As winter approached, the train car became more than just Caleb's project. It became a community gathering place. People would stop by to see the progress, often staying to help or just talk. Mike set up a fire pit outside where locals would gather on Friday nights sharing beer and stories. You know what you've done, Sarah said one evening, watching children play hide and seek around the train car while adults talked by the fire. You've given us a reason to come together. This town's been dying for years, everyone isolated, everyone struggling alone. But this project, it's reminded us that we're neighbors. But even as the train car brought the community together, Caleb remained haunted by one absence. Marcus, his son, hadn't returned a single call since Margaret's funeral. The distance between them had started years before a slow drift that became a chasm. Marcus blamed Caleb for staying at the factory too long, for not being there enough for 100 small failures that accumulated into estrangement. One night, going through more of the train car's hidden treasures, Caleb found another cache, this one tucked behind a panel in what had been the conductor's compartment. Among old tickets and faded photographs was a bundle of letters tied with string. Love letters from the 1940s between a soldier and his sweetheart. The final letter was different, written in a different hand. My darling passed yesterday, 53 years we had together. Not enough, but more than many get. I'm leaving these letters here in this car where we first met, where you proposed, where our story began. May whoever finds them know that love persists even through separation, even through silence, even through death. Caleb read the letters by lantern light, his hands shaking. The love they contained, the persistence of connection, despite distance and hardship, made him think of Marcus. His son was out there carrying his own grief, his own anger. The silence between them was a choice, not a law of nature. He pulled out his phone, stared at Marcus's contact for a long moment, then put it away. Not yet. He wasn't ready yet. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the clearing in pristine white. The train car, now painted a deep green with cream trim, looked like something from a Christmas card. Caleb had installed large windows salvaged from an old church, and warm light spilled out into the winter darkness. Inside, the transformation was remarkable. The main living area had hardwood floors made from reclaimed barnwood. The walls were insulated and paneled, decorated with railroad memorabilia and photographs from the train car's history. A small but efficient kitchen occupied one end with a composting toilet and shower stall tucked into what had been a luggage compartment. The wood stove crackled warmly, heating the entire space. But the masterpiece was the library. Caleb had converted one end of the car into a reading room with built-in shelves, reaching to the ceiling filled with books donated by locals, or bought from estate sales. A restored conductor's chair sat by the window, perfect for reading as snow fell outside. This is where Trevor spent most of his time working through adventure stories and history books. "Can I bring my friends?" Trevor asked one day. "They don't believe me when I tell them about the train car." Soon the train car became an after-school destination for local children. Caleb found himself conducting impromptu history lessons using Morrison's journal and other artifacts to bring the past to life. Parents initially suspicious began to appreciate this strange man who treated their children with respect and kindness. Carl Davidson made another appearance this time with a county inspector in tow. They walked around the property, Davidson pointing out supposed violations while the inspector took notes. "No proper septic system," Davidson said triumphantly. "No electrical permit. This structure doesn't meet minimum housing standards." The inspector, an older woman named Janet, studied the train car carefully. Then she turned to Davidson. "This isn't a permanent structure," she said. "It's a vehicle. Different regulations apply, and Mr. Warren has installed a composting toilet system that's perfectly legal for this type of dwelling. But, furthermore," Janet continued, "this is designated as historical preservation. Train cars of this vintage are protected. If anything, Mr. Warren should be commended for his restoration work." She turned to Caleb. "My father worked for the railroad. Seeing this car brought back to life. It's wonderful. You need any help navigating the bureaucracy, you call me." Davidson left in a fury, but Caleb knew he hadn't given up. Men like Davidson never did. As Christmas approached, the train car became the center of holiday preparations. Sarah organized a decoration party, and soon the car was draped in lights visible from the road like a beacon. A large Christmas tree stood in the clearing, decorated with ornaments made by local children. On Christmas Eve, Caleb hosted a dinner. The train car was packed with neighbors, everyone bringing dishes to share. Trevor gave a dramatic reading from the Polar Express, which seemed fitting given the venue. The wood stove glowed, snow fell outside, and for a moment Caleb felt something he thought he'd never feel again. Contentment. But late that night, after everyone had gone home, he sat alone in his conductor's chair looking at his phone. He'd composed 100 messages to Marcus over the past months, deleted them all. What could he say? How could he bridge 20 years of growing distance? Finally, he typed simply, "Merry Christmas, son. I love you." He hit send before he could reconsider. 3 days later, his phone rang. Marcus's name on the screen made Caleb's heart race. "Dad." The voice was older than Caleb remembered, rougher. "Marcus." Silence stretched between them, years of unspoken words creating static on the line. "I got your message," Marcus said finally. "Mom, before she died, she made me promise to give you another chance. I wasn't ready then. I'm not sure I'm ready now, but I promised." "I understand," Caleb said, his voice thick. "Where are you? The neighbors in Detroit said you disappeared." "North Carolina, Millbrook. I'm renovating an old train car." Marcus laughed, but it wasn't unkind. "Of course you are. You always did like projects more than people." The words stung because they held truth. Caleb had hidden in work in the factory and routine rather than face the messy complexity of relationships. "I'm trying to change," Caleb said. "I know it's late, maybe too late, but I'm trying." "Mom left me a letter," Marcus said suddenly. "Said I should forgive you. Said you did the best you could with what you knew. Said holding on to anger would poison me like it poisoned you." "Your mother was wise." "Yeah, she was." Marcus paused. "I'm not ready to visit. Not yet. But maybe we could talk sometimes. Start there." "I'd like that." After they hung up, Caleb sat in the darkness of the train car, tears streaming down his face. Margaret had reached out from beyond death to help heal what seemed unhealable. He pulled out Morrison's journal, reading the entry about carrying people to their destinies. Perhaps that's what the train car was doing for him, carrying him slowly, painfully, toward a destination he couldn't yet see. The winter was hard. The wood stove kept the train car warm, but Caleb had to constantly feed it, waking every few hours during the coldest nights to add logs. Water froze in the pipes he'd installed. The road became nearly impassable after heavy snows, but he persisted, and so did his visitors. Mike would plow the road with his tractor. Sarah brought hot meals, Trevor and Ellie spent many evenings in the warm train car reading or playing board games while snow piled against the windows. One February morning, Caleb woke to find an envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a photograph Marcus and a woman Caleb didn't recognize standing in front of a Christmas tree. On the back, Marcus had written, "Her name is Jennifer. We're getting married in June. Thought you should know." Caleb stared at the photo for an hour. His son was getting married, and he hadn't even known he was dating someone. The distance between them seemed impossible to bridge, but at least Marcus had sent the photo. That was something. He called that evening. "She's beautiful," Caleb said. "How did you meet?" "Work. She's a nurse at the hospital where I do it." Marcus's voice was cautious but not hostile. "We've been together 2 years." 2 years. 2 years of his son's life he'd missed entirely. "I'm happy for you," Caleb said, meaning it. "Thanks." A pause. "I told her about you. About the train car. She thinks it sounds amazing. You're both welcome to visit any time. Maybe after the wedding, when things calm down." They talked for another 10 minutes, awkwardly, but genuinely. When Caleb hung up, he felt like he'd successfully crossed a narrow bridge over a deep chasm. There was still a long way to go, but at least he was moving forward. Spring came slowly to the mountains, but when it arrived, it transformed the clearing. Wildflowers bloomed in profusion. Trillium, bloodroot, wild azaleas. The creek swelled with snowmelt, its babbling audible from the train car. Birds nested in the eaves Caleb had carefully restored. The train car itself was nearly complete. Solar panels on the roof provided basic electricity. A rainwater collection system fed the sink and shower. The interior was cozy and functional, every inch utilized efficiently. But more than that, it had become beautiful. The restored wood gleamed. Brass fixtures carefully polished caught the light. The windows framed views of the forest like living paintings. One April afternoon, a car Caleb didn't recognize pulled up the road, an expensive sedan that looked out of place on the dirt track. An elderly man got out using a cane, moving slowly but deliberately toward the train car. "Mr. Warren," the man said, "my name is William Morrison. James Morrison was my grandfather." Caleb's heart skipped. "The journal." "Yes, I heard through the local historical society that you'd found it. I had to come see." Caleb gave William the journal, watching as the old man's eyes filled with tears reading his grandfather's words. Then he gave him a tour of the restored train car, showing how he'd tried to honor its history while making it livable. "He would be so pleased," William said, running his hand along a restored handrail. "He loved these cars, said they were America at its best, going somewhere taking people along for the ride." William stayed for hours sharing stories his grandfather had told him about the railroad days. Before he left, he pulled out an envelope. "I want you to have this," he said. "It's a photograph of my grandfather standing in front of this very car, 1925. And this," he pulled out a bronze plaque. "I had this made. Thought it should be displayed somewhere." The plaque read, "Pullman car hash 2847. In service 1923 to 1968. Carried dreams across America. Restored to carry them again." Caleb mounted the plaque by the door that very day. Word of the train car spread beyond Millbrook. A regional newspaper did a story about it, complete with before and after photos that seemed impossible to reconcile. Then a travel blogger visited, writing about the magic train car in the Carolina mountains. People began driving hours to see it, to talk to Caleb, to understand how someone could transform ruin into beauty. But fame brought problems. Carl Davidson saw opportunity in the attention. He approached Caleb with an offer. "I'll buy the property," he said. 3 times what it's worth. You can take your train car wherever you want." "Not for sale," Caleb said. "Everything's for sale. How about 5 times? My grandfather wanted something built on this land. Now something is. It stays." Davidson's face darkened. "You're making a mistake. This area is changing whether you like it or not. You can be part of the prosperity or get run over by it." But Caleb had already been run over once by grief, by loss, by the collapse of everything he'd built his life on. He'd survived. The train car was proof that broken things could be restored, that endings could become beginnings. As spring turned to summer, the clearing became a gathering place for the community. Caleb built picnic tables from fallen trees, created walking trails through the property, even restored an old railroad handcar that children could pump along a short section of track he'd laid. Trevor had become like a grandson to him, spending entire days at the property. His reading had improved dramatically, inspired by the books in the train car library. His confidence had grown too nurtured by Caleb's patient attention and trust. "I want to be an engineer," Trevor announced one day, "like the people who built this train car." "That's a fine ambition," Caleb said. "You've got the mind for it." Ellie watched from the doorway, a soft smile on her face. She'd been spending more time at the train car too, helping with gardens Caleb had planted, organizing the increasing number of visitors. "You've been good for him," she said one evening as Trevor ran ahead to the creek. "Good for both of us, really. We were pretty lost when we came to Millbrook." "Funny thing about being lost," Caleb said. "Sometimes that's when you find what you're looking for." Their eyes met, held for a moment. Something unspoken passed between them, a possibility neither was ready to name. The call came on a humid Thursday evening in late June. Marcus, his voice nervous but determined. "Dad, Jennifer and I were driving down. If the offer's still open." "Always," Caleb said, his heart pounding. "When?" "Tomorrow. We'll get there around noon." Caleb didn't sleep that night. He cleaned the already spotless train car, prepared food, changed clothes 3 times. When he heard the car coming up the road, he stood frozen in the doorway, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell had brought his son back to him. Marcus had filled out no longer the skinny teenager Caleb remembered. His face carried lines that spoke of his own struggles, his own grief. Jennifer was indeed beautiful, with kind eyes and a warm smile. She stepped forward first, extending her hand. "Mr. Warren, I've heard so much about you. Please call me Caleb." Marcus stood back, hands in his pockets, taking in the train car, the clearing, the community gardens that had sprung up around it. "This is incredible," he said finally. "Mom would have loved it." "She would have," Caleb agreed, his voice thick. They toured the train car, Jennifer exclaiming over the details, the craftsmanship, the history. Marcus was quieter, running his hands along surfaces his father had restored, seeing the months of labor, of dedication, of transformation. "You did all this yourself?" he asked. "Had help?" Amazing what people can do together. They sat at one of the picnic tables, awkward at first, then gradually warming as Jennifer asked questions, drew stories out of both men. She had a gift for it, for finding common ground, for bridging silences. "Tell me about Grandma Margaret," she said to Caleb. "Marcus has told me his memories, but I'd love to hear yours." So Caleb talked about meeting Margaret at a dance in 1968, about their early years when everything seemed possible, about her laugh that could fill a room, about her fierce love for Marcus, about her grace, even as cancer stole everything from her but her spirit. "She made me promise," Marcus said suddenly, "to forgive you, but also to forgive myself, for the distance, for the anger, for not being there at the end." "You were there when it mattered," Caleb said. "You were always in her heart." "I was so angry," Marcus continued, "at you, at the world, at her for leaving, but mostly at myself, for wasting so much time on resentment." "We both did," Caleb said. "But we're here now." Trevor appeared then, running up the path with Ellie behind him. He stopped short, seeing strangers suddenly shy. "Trevor, this is my son, Marcus, and his fiancée, Jennifer," Caleb said. "Marcus, this is Trevor and his mother, Ellie. They're special friends." The two families mingled, Trevor overcoming his shyness to give Marcus and Jennifer his own tour of the train car, pointing out every detail, every story Caleb had told him. Ellie and Jennifer found easy conversation, both teachers, as it turned out, both understanding the challenge of reaching struggling children. As the sun set, they built a fire in the pit. Other neighbors drifted over, drawn by the smoke and laughter. Sarah brought food. Mike brought his guitar, and soon the clearing was full of music and stories. Marcus watched his father in this new context, not the silent, exhausted factory worker he remembered, but a man renewed, connected, vital. "You've built something beautiful here," Marcus said quietly, sitting beside his father as the fire crackled. "Still building," Caleb said. "Always building. Mom knew, didn't she, that you needed this? That's why she made us both promise." Caleb nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. I want to help, Marcus said. With whatever comes next. I want to be part of this. They embraced. Then, father and son, 14 months of grief and 20 years of distance dissolving in that moment. Around them, the community celebrated, but for Caleb and Marcus, the world had shrunk to just the two of them, holding on, holding tight, finally home. The morning after Marcus and Jennifer left, promising to return for a longer visit, soon Caleb found himself standing in the doorway of the train car watching the sun rise over the mountains. The fire pit still smoldered from the night before, wisps of smoke curling into the cool morning air. He could hardly believe it had been real, that his son had sat beside him. That forgiveness had been offered and accepted, that the chasm between them had begun to close. But life in Millbrook continued its rhythm, and new challenges emerged with the summer heat. The attention from the blog post had brought more visitors than ever, some days seeing a dozen cars navigate the dirt road to glimpse the famous train car. Most were respectful, taking photos and asking questions, but others treated the property like a tourist attraction, leaving trash-picking wildflowers, even attempting to enter the train car when Caleb wasn't there. "You need to put up a gate," Mike suggested after finding a family having a picnic on Caleb's carefully tended lawn without permission. "Maybe charge admission. Lord knows you could use the money." But Caleb resisted the idea of turning his grandfather's land into a commercial venture. This was his home, not a museum. Still, something had to be done. The solution came from an unexpected source. Trevor, who had developed a proprietary interest in the train car, suggested creating official visiting hours. "Like a real historical site," he said excitedly. "I could be the tour guide." So they established weekend tours 2 hours on Saturday and Sunday afternoons, when visitors could come learn about the train car's history and see the restoration. Trevor, with his natural enthusiasm and encyclopedic knowledge gained from months of helping Caleb, proved to be an excellent guide. Ellie helped by creating a small gift shop in a shed Caleb repaired, selling postcards, local crafts, and copies of James Morrison's journal that William Morrison had helped them publish. The modest income from the tours and gift shop helped with maintenance costs, but more importantly, it gave the visit structure and purpose. People weren't just gawking at an oddity. They were learning about railroad history, about craftsmanship, about what community effort could accomplish. One Saturday, a group of railroad enthusiasts from Charlotte arrived, men in their 70s and 80s who had worked for various rail companies. They examined every detail of the restoration with expert eyes, occasionally shaking their heads in wonder. "You did this mostly alone?" one asked a former engineer named Harold. "Had help from neighbors, but yes, mostly," Caleb replied. Harold ran his hand along a perfectly restored window frame. "I've seen professional restorations that weren't half this good. You've got real talent, son." "Just patience and desperation," Caleb said with a self-deprecating smile. "Don't sell yourself short," Harold said seriously. "This is art. This is love made tangible." The old railmen stayed for hours sharing stories that complemented Morrison's journal, filling in historical gaps with lived experience. Before they left, they presented Caleb with a collection of railroad memorabilia for the train car, including an authentic conductor's uniform from the 1940s and a set of brass instruments used for navigation. But Carl Davidson hadn't given up his harassment. Unable to force Caleb out through legal means, he tried more subtle approaches. He bought the property adjacent to Caleb's eastern border and immediately began clear-cutting the chainsaw noise, destroying the peaceful atmosphere. He spread rumors in town that Caleb was running an illegal business, that the train car was a health hazard, that property values were dropping because of the eyesore. Most locals saw through Davidson's tactics, but some believed him. A petition circulated demanding the county take action. A few nasty letters appeared under Caleb's door. Someone spray-painted "Leave" on the side of the train car one night, the red paint like a wound on the carefully restored green surface. Caleb spent hours removing the graffiti, Trevor working beside him in angry silence. The boy had taken the vandalism personally, as an attack on something sacred. "Why do people have to ruin beautiful things?" Trevor asked, scrubbing furiously at a stubborn paint streak. "Sometimes people can't stand seeing others succeed where they've failed," Caleb said. "Or they're so miserable they want everyone else to be miserable too." "That's stupid," Trevor said fiercely. "Yes, it is." Ellie arrived with lunch, took one look at their faces and immediately understood something was wrong. When she saw the vandalism, her expression hardened in a way Caleb hadn't seen before. "Davidson?" she asked. "Probably someone he encouraged," Caleb said. "This has to stop," she said. "He's been bullying this town for years, but this is too far." That evening, Ellie organized what she called a community response. Within days, she had rallied the town council, gathered signatures for a counter-petition, and even convinced the local news station to do a positive story about the train car's impact on Millbrook's economy and community spirit. The news segment aired on a Thursday evening. Caleb watched it at Sarah's diner, surrounded by neighbors. The reporter interviewed Trevor, who spoke eloquently about history and restoration. They interviewed Sarah about increased business from tourists. They interviewed Mike about community building. The segment ended with a beautiful drone shot of the train car and its clearing looking like something from a fairy tale. "The miracle of Millbrook," the reporter called it, how one man's vision brought a dying town back to life. It was hyperbole, but it had an effect. Positive messages poured in from across the state. A wealthy railroad history buff sent a substantial donation to help with maintenance. A preservation society offered to help get the train car registered as a historical landmark. Davidson's influence began to wane as public opinion turned decisively against him. But the stress of the confrontation combined with the physical demands of maintaining the property began to take its toll on Caleb. One morning in August, he woke with chest pains that made him gasp. He lay still, waiting for them to pass, but they persisted, a crushing weight that made breathing difficult. This is it, he thought. This is how it ends. Just when things were getting better. He managed to call Mike, who found him on the floor of the train car, gray-faced and struggling to breathe. The ambulance ride to the hospital in Asheville was a blur of oxygen masks and concerned voices. Tests were run, monitors attached, doctors consulted. It wasn't a heart attack, though it had felt like one. Stress, exhaustion, and dehydration had combined to create a perfect storm of symptoms. The doctor, a young woman who looked impossibly young to be giving medical advice, was blunt. "You're 52, not 22, she said. "You've been pushing yourself too hard. Your body is telling you to slow down." "Can't slow down," Caleb muttered. "Too much to do." "You can slow down or your body will make you stop permanently," she said. "Your choice." Ellie and Trevor were in the waiting room when he was released. Trevor ran to him, hugging him fiercely, and Caleb felt the boy trembling. "I thought you were going to die," Trevor whispered. "Like my dad did." Caleb held him tighter. He hadn't known Trevor's father had died, had assumed divorce or abandonment. The boy's fear took on new dimensions. "I'm not going anywhere," Caleb said, hoping it was a promise he could keep. Ellie drove them back to Millbrook in silence, but her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. When they reached the train car, she finally spoke. "You scared us," she said simply. "You scared me." "I scared myself," Caleb admitted. "You need help. Real help, not just weekend volunteers. You can't maintain this place alone." She was right, but Caleb didn't know how to accept help. How to admit he couldn't do everything himself. It went against every instinct developed over decades of self-reliance. The solution came from Marcus, who called that evening after hearing about the hospital visit from Mike. "I'm taking a week off," Marcus said. "Jennifer and I are coming down." "You don't need to." "Yes, I do. Dad, you nearly killed yourself trying to prove something. What would Mom say?" Margaret would say, "Stop being a stubborn fool and let people help you," Caleb thought. Marcus and Jennifer arrived 2 days later with a car full of supplies and a plan. Marcus had researched sustainable property management, rainwater systems, solar power optimization. Jennifer had ideas for medicinal gardens and natural landscaping that would require less maintenance. But more than practical help, they brought emotional support. For the first time since Margaret's death, Caleb felt held by family. They worked together during the days, Marcus proving surprisingly handy with tools, Jennifer demonstrating a gift for organization. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, sharing memories, building new ones. "I've been thinking," Marcus said on their last night. "Jennifer and I have been talking about leaving Detroit. Her hospital has a branch in Asheville. I can work remotely. We could be closer." Caleb's heart leaped, but he kept his voice steady. "That's a big decision. Don't make it on my account." "We're not," Jennifer said. We're making it on our account. We want to be near family. We want what you've built here, community connection purpose. Plus, Marcus added with a small smile, someone needs to keep you from working yourself to death. They left with promises to return soon to make the move by fall. Caleb watched their car disappear down the dirt road and felt a completeness he hadn't experienced in years. The train car had brought him more than shelter. It had brought him home in every sense of the word. September arrived with a burst of color in the trees and a crispness in the air that made working outside pleasant again. Caleb, following doctor's orders, had reduced his physical work, focusing instead on planning and supervising as volunteers handled the heavier tasks. The autumn brought a new challenge. The local elementary school, facing budget cuts that eliminated field trips, couldn't take students to the Railroad Museum in Spencer as planned. Trevor, overhearing his teacher's disappointment, suggested they visit the train car instead. Mr. Caleb knows more about trains than any museum guide, he insisted, and it's free. So Caleb found himself hosting 20 third graders on an October morning, their excitement barely contained as they explored the train car. He'd prepared for weeks, creating activity stations where children could practice sending telegraph messages, examine artifacts under magnifying glasses, and even operate the restored handcar under careful supervision. Was it scary? A little girl asked. Living here all alone when it was all broken. Sometimes, Caleb admitted, but broken things aren't always scary. Sometimes they're just waiting for someone to see what they could become. The teacher misses. Rodriguez watched her students engage with history in a way they never did with textbooks. Would you consider doing this regularly? She asked. Maybe once a month for different grades. So the train car became an educational destination, with Caleb developing programs that met state curriculum standards while bringing history to life. He discovered he had a gift for teaching, for making the past relevant to young minds. Trevor served as his assistant, proud to share his knowledge with peers who suddenly saw him as an expert on something cool. The educational programs caught the attention of the State Historical Society, which offered a grant to develop more extensive materials. A retired teacher named Dorothy volunteered to help create workbooks and activity guides. Soon schools from 3 counties were booking visits. But it was a different kind of visit that changed everything. On a gray November afternoon, a black sedan pulled up the now well-worn road. A woman in her 60s emerged well-dressed, but walking with the careful steps of someone uncertain of their welcome. She stood at the edge of the clearing, staring at the train car with an expression Caleb couldn't read. "Can I help you?" he asked, approaching carefully. She turned and he saw she'd been crying. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come. It's just, my father worked on this car." "This specific car?" She nodded. "He was a porter like James Morrison. They worked together. When I read about what you'd done about finding Morrison's journal, I had to see it." Her name was Constance Williams. Her father, Robert, had been one of the first black porters to work the prestigious routes, facing discrimination with dignity while providing for his family. She had photographs, letters, even a few pages from her father's own journal that mentioned Morrison and car 2847. "They were friends," she said, showing Caleb a photograph of Morrison and her father standing together in front of the train car. At a time when that wasn't easy or safe. Caleb invited her inside, showed her the restoration shared Morrison's journal entries that mentioned Robert. She wept openly, reading Morrison's words about her father. "Robert has more dignity in his smallest gesture than most men have in their entire lives. I am proud to call him friend." "Daddy never talked much about those days," Constance said. "The indignities he suffered, the strength it took just to do his job. But he loved the railroad, said it was freedom movement possibility." She stayed for hours, sharing stories that added new dimensions to the train car's history. Before leaving, she presented Caleb with her father's porter cap and jacket, carefully preserved for decades. "These belong here," she said, "part of the full story." Well, Caleb created a special display for Robert Williams items, accompanied by his photograph and story. It became one of the most powerful elements of the educational tours, helping children understand that history isn't just dates and facts, but real people facing real challenges with courage and grace. Winter came early that year, with November snow that transformed the clearing into a wonderland. The train car, now equipped with better insulation and a more efficient heating system Marcus had helped install, was cozy even in the coldest weather. Marcus and Jennifer had made good on their promise moving to Asheville in October. They visited every weekend, sometimes staying overnight in a small guest shelter Caleb and Mike had built from reclaimed materials. The shelter was tiny but charming, with a single room that served as bedroom and living space, and an outdoor kitchen area for warm weather. The relationship between Caleb and Marcus continued to heal layer by layer, conversation by conversation. They worked side by side on projects, the shared labor easier than forced talks. Jennifer proved gifted at drawing both men out, asking questions that led to stories, admissions, understanding. "Tell me about Dad as a kid," she said one snowy evening as they sat in the train car, the wood stove crackling. So Caleb told stories he hadn't thought about in years. Marcus at 5 insisting on wearing a Superman cape to kindergarten every day for a month. Marcus at 10 building elaborate Lego cities that took over the entire basement. Marcus at 15 teaching himself guitar from YouTube videos, the house filled with fumbling chords that gradually became music. "You remember all that?" Marcus asked, surprised. "I remember everything," Caleb said. "I just didn't know how to show it. Your mother was the one who knew how to express love. I only knew how to work." "Work is a kind of love," Jennifer said gently. "Providing, protecting, building, that's love too." "Maybe," Caleb said, "but it's not enough by itself." "No," Marcus agreed, "but it's something. And now we have time for the rest." The holiday season approached with the train car at the center of community celebrations. Sarah organized a Christmas market in the clearing with local crafters selling goods from small booths. The train car itself was decorated elaborately, becoming a destination for families seeking holiday photos. Trevor had grown 3 inches since spring, and his voice was beginning to crack, but his enthusiasm for the train car remained undiminished. He'd started a blog about the restoration and its history, his writing improving dramatically through the practice. "I want to be a historian," he announced one day. "Or maybe a writer, or both." "Both is good," Caleb said. "Never limit yourself to one dream." Ellie watched her son with pride mixed with something else Caleb was beginning to recognize. They'd grown closer through the months, their relationship evolving from neighbors to friends to something undefined but undeniably present. She'd stay for dinner after Trevor's visits, helping cook, sharing conversation that ranged from trivial to profound. One evening, as snow fell softly outside and Trevor dozed on the small couch Caleb had installed, Ellie spoke quietly. "You've given us a home here. Not just the physical space, but the belonging. Trevor's never had that before. Neither have I, really." "You've given me the same," Caleb said. "This place was just a project until you and Trevor made it a home." She reached across the small table, taking his hand. "Caleb, I need to know, is this something us, or am I imagining it?" He squeezed her hand gently. "It's something. I don't know what exactly. I'm not sure I'm ready for. Margaret." "I'm not asking you to forget her," Ellie said. "I'm not asking for anything except honesty. Can you see a future where there's room for someone else?" Caleb thought of Margaret, of what she would want for him. She'd been clear in her final days, "Live, love, don't waste the time you have left." But knowing what she'd want and being able to do it were different things. "I can see it," he said finally. "But I need time. This is all still so new." "Time I can give," Ellie said, smiling. "We're not going anywhere." Carl Davidson made one final attempt to destroy what Caleb had built. He filed a lawsuit claiming the increased traffic to the train car was damaging the road, lowering property values, and creating a public nuisance. He demanded damages and an injunction that would effectively shut down all visits. The legal threat could have been devastating, but the community rallied. A lawyer from Asheville, whose grandfather had been a railroad worker, took the case pro bono. The town council passed a resolution declaring the train car a cultural asset. Letters of support poured in from across the state. The hearing was held in December, the small courthouse packed with supporters. Davidson's lawyer presented his case with corporate efficiency, citing ordinances and precedents. But when Caleb's lawyer called witnesses, the room filled with stories. Sarah testified about increased business bringing life back to downtown. The school principal spoke about the educational value, how students who'd visited the train car showed improved interest in history. Mike talked about community building, how the train car had become a gathering place that strengthened social bonds. But it was Trevor who made the strongest impact. Standing before the judge, his voice cracking but determined, he said, "Mr. Davidson thinks the train car is worthless because it was broken. But Mr. Caleb taught me that broken things can be fixed. That's what America is supposed to be about, isn't it? Not giving up on things just because they're hard to fix." The judge ruled decisively in Caleb's favor, not only dismissing Davidson's suit, but ordering him to pay court costs. Furthermore, she recommended the train car for historical landmark status, which would provide permanent protection. Davidson left the courthouse in fury, but his influence in Millbrook was broken. Within months, he would sell his properties and leave town searching for easier prey elsewhere. Christmas Eve brought unexpected magic. Marcus and Jennifer arrived early, arms full of presents and food. Sarah closed the diner early to cook in the train car's small kitchen. Mike brought his whole family, including grandchildren who ran through the snow with Trevor, their laughter echoing through the trees. As evening fell, more people arrived. The railroad enthusiasts from Charlotte making a special trip, Mrs. Rodriguez with her family, Constance Williams with her adult children, wanting them to see their grandfather's legacy. Even Janet, the county inspector, stopped by with homemade cookies. The train car couldn't hold everyone, so the gathering spilled into the clearing where fires burned in multiple pits, creating circles of warmth and light. Someone had brought speakers, and soon Christmas music mixed with conversation and laughter. Caleb stood in the doorway of the train car, watching the scene with wonder. A year and a half ago, he'd been alone in a dying apartment, waiting to die himself. Now he was surrounded by family, blood, family, and chosen family, the kind built through shared work and mutual care. Margaret should be here, he thought, then realized she was. She was in Marcus's laugh, in the community she'd known he needed, in the love she'd insisted would find him again if he'd let it. Ellie appeared beside him, slipping her hand into his. "You did this," she said. "You brought all these people together." "We did this," he corrected. "All of us." At midnight, as snow began to fall again, Trevor suggested they sing carols. His voice cracking between boy and man started Silent Night, and others joined in their voices carrying through the forest. Caleb found himself singing too, his voice rusty but sincere. Marcus appeared on his other side, putting an arm around his father's shoulders. "Mom would have loved this," he said. "She would have," Caleb agreed. "I'm proud of you, Dad, for surviving, for building this, for becoming who you were always supposed to be." Later, after everyone had gone home and the fires had died to embers, Caleb sat alone in the train car. But it wasn't the oppressive solitude of grief anymore. It was peaceful, contemplative, full of possibility. He pulled out James Morrison's journal, reading again the final entry about the train car being hope on wheels. Morrison had been right. The train car had carried so many to their destinies, and now it had carried Caleb to his not a destination, but a journey, not an ending, but a continuation. Outside, an owl called through the snow-muffled darkness. The train car creaked gently, as if remembering its rolling days, as if ready to carry more dreams into the future. Caleb smiled, closed the journal, and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new visitors, new stories to add to the legend of Car 2847. But tonight, in this restored relic that had become a home surrounded by the invisible presence of all who'd been part of its resurrection, Caleb Warren was exactly where he belonged. The boy who'd left Detroit as Walter Warren's grandson had become the man who'd fulfilled Walter's dream, not by building what was expected, but by restoring what was forgotten, proving that sometimes the most profound journeys happen while standing still. The train car sat in its clearing snow, accumulating on its restored roof windows, glowing with warm light, a beacon in the darkness that said, "Here is sanctuary, here is history, here is hope." And in communities across America, other forgotten things waited to be remembered, other broken things waited to be restored, other dreamers waited for the courage to begin. The new year arrived with an ice storm that transformed the clearing into a crystal palace, every branch and blade of grass encased in glass. Caleb woke to the sound of trees cracking under the weight, a sharp gunshot noise that had him jumping from bed in the pre-dawn darkness. Through the train car windows, he could see massive limbs falling in slow motion, shattering into thousands of glittering fragments when they hit the frozen ground. By morning, the dirt road was completely blocked by fallen trees. Power lines were down across the county, and the train car was an island in a sea of devastation. The solar panels were covered in 2 inches of ice. The water pipes were frozen solid, and the temperature inside was dropping steadily despite the wood stove burning at full capacity. Trevor and Ellie had planned to visit that day, but Caleb knew they wouldn't be able to get through. His phone had no signal, the towers likely damaged by ice. For the first time since moving to the train car, he felt truly isolated, cut off from the community that had become his lifeline. The isolation triggered memories of those first weeks after Margaret's death, when the world had felt equally unreachable despite being surrounded by millions in Detroit. But this was different. This isolation was temporary, circumstantial. The other had been spiritual, a severing of connection that had nearly killed him. He spent the morning trying to clear ice from the solar panels with lukewarm water heated on the wood stove, but it reformed almost instantly. The generator had enough fuel for maybe 2 days if used sparingly. He'd have to choose between keeping phones charged for emergency communication or running the small refrigerator where he kept insulin for Harold, one of the railroad retirees who'd become a regular visitor and had left his medication during the last tour. The choice was made for him when he heard chainsaws in the distance. Mike and 3 other neighbors had spent 4 hours cutting their way through the road, their trucks loaded with emergency supplies. They arrived looking like Arctic explorers, ice in their beards, faces red with cold and exertion. "Figured you might need some help up here," Mike said, handing over containers of hot soup his wife had sent. "Half the county's without power. They're saying it might be a week before it's restored." Together they worked to clear the most dangerous hanging branches, secure the train car's roof where ice was building up dangerously, and rig a temporary shelter for the generator. Harold's son arrived on a 4-wheeler to retrieve the insulin, thanking Caleb for keeping it safe. "Dad talks about this place constantly," he said. "Says it saved his life after Mom died. Gave him something to look forward to every week." As the men worked, Caleb realized this was what Margaret had known he needed. Not just a project to occupy his hands, but a web of relationships that could catch him when he fell. The train car had become the center of that web, but the connections extended far beyond its restored walls. The ice storm's aftermath brought unexpected opportunities. With schools closed and power out across the region, families sought activities that didn't require electricity. The train car, with its wood stove and battery-powered lanterns, became a warm refuge. Caleb found himself hosting impromptu story hours, teaching children how to play cards by lamplight, showing them how people had lived before electricity became ubiquitous. "This is like camping," one boy said excitedly, "except in a train." Parents who'd never visited before discovered the magic of the space, the way it transported visitors to another era. Several signed up for future educational programs, and one mother, a grant writer by profession, offered to help secure funding for expansion. It was during this icebound week that Caleb received a call that changed everything. The crackling connection barely sustained Marcus's voice, but the message was clear: Jennifer was pregnant. They'd found out just that morning, had wanted Caleb to be among the first to know. "You're going to be a grandfather," Marcus said, and Caleb could hear tears in his son's voice. "We're thinking October." Caleb sank into Morrison's conductor chair, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't name. Margaret should be here for this. She should be the one planning baby showers and knitting blankets. But alongside the grief was joy, pure and unexpected. Life continuing, generations connecting, the future insisting on itself despite all loss. "Dad, you still there?" "I'm here," Caleb managed. "I'm so happy for you both, so happy." "Oh, we want to raise the baby here," Marcus continued. "Near family, near you. Jennifer's already looking at houses in Millbrook." After the call ended, Caleb sat in the gathering dusk watching ice melt and drip from the train car's roof like tears. A grandfather. He would be to this child what Walter had been to him, a source of stories, wisdom, unconditional love. But unlike Walter, he would be present, available, involved. The ice melted over 3 days, leaving behind damaged trees, but also a sense of resilience in the community. People had pulled together, shared resources, looked after each other. The train car had served as one of several gathering points where people could warm up, charge phones, share meals. It had proven its worth not as a tourist attraction, but as essential community infrastructure. Carl Davidson's departure had left a vacuum in Millbrook's power structure, but instead of another would-be mogul filling it, something more democratic emerged. A community development committee formed with Sarah as chair and Ellie as secretary. They met in the train car on Tuesday evenings, planning ways to revitalize the town while preserving its character. "We don't want to become another tourist trap," Sarah said at one meeting, "but we need economic development. The question is how to manage growth without losing our soul." The answer came partly from an unexpected source. A documentary filmmaker named Rebecca Chen had heard about the train car through social media and arrived in February with a small crew. She was interested not just in the restoration, but in the larger story of community regeneration. "This is about more than one man fixing up an old train car," she said, her camera capturing the evening light through the restored windows. "This is about how Americans are redefining community in the 21st century." She interviewed dozens of people over 2 weeks, capturing not just the train car's story, but Millbrook's, the factory closures, the young people leaving the slow decay arrested by collective action. Caleb was reluctant to be the center of the narrative, insisting others receive equal attention. "I just provided a focal point," he told Rebecca. "The community did the real work." "But focal points matter," she replied. "Sometimes all it takes is one person doing something unusual to catalyst change." The filming brought its own energy to the town. People who'd grown used to the train car saw it with fresh eyes through the camera lens. Trevor, appointed as Rebecca's official local guide, blossomed under the attention, his knowledge and enthusiasm, making him a natural on camera. "That boy's got a future in this," Rebecca told Ellie. "He's got the rare ability to make history feel immediate and relevant." One evening, Rebecca filmed what she called a community dinner, where locals gathered in and around the train car to share food and stories. The camera captured Sarah ladling soup, Mike tuning his guitar, children playing in the restored handcar, elderly residents sharing memories of Millbrook's better days. But it also captured quieter moments, Caleb and Ellie standing together watching the sunset, their hands almost touching. Marcus and Jennifer arriving with ultrasound photos to share. Trevor reading from Morrison's journal to a rapt audience of younger children. "This is beautiful," Rebecca said, reviewing footage on her laptop. "It's like you've created a modern version of the community Morrison described in his journal, people from different backgrounds, different struggles coming together in a shared space." The comparison resonated with Caleb. Morrison had written about the train car as a democratic space where millionaires and immigrants shared the same journey, where stories were exchanged across class lines. The restored train car served a similar function, bringing together people who might never have otherwise connected. As spring arrived with its explosion of mountain wildflowers, the documentary's impact began to ripple outward. Rebecca had shared rough cuts with potential distributors, and interest was high. A streaming service expressed interest in featuring it as part of a series on American renewal. But fame brought complications. More tourists arrived, some respectful, others treating Millbrook like a theme park. Someone started an unauthorized train car tours business, bringing busloads of visitors who expected entertainment rather than education. The community committee met an emergency session. Some wanted to capitalize on the attention, others wanted to restrict access entirely. The debate grew heated, old tensions between preservation and progress surfacing. "We can't go backward," said Tom the electrician. "This attention could save the town." "Or destroy it," Mike countered. "Look what happened to that town in Vermont after that movie made it famous. Nothing but gift shops and rental properties now." Caleb listened to the arguments, thinking about Walter's original dream for this land. His grandfather had wanted to build something, create something lasting. But he'd also valued privacy, independence, the right to live unmolested. What if, Caleb suggested, we create a model that others can replicate instead of everyone coming here? Document the process, share the knowledge, help other communities restore their own forgotten treasures. The idea sparked new discussion. Ellie suggested creating an online course about community restoration. Sarah proposed a handbook for small-town revitalization. Trevor, increasingly confident in his writing, volunteered to start a blog series about finding and restoring historical structures. "We become not a destination, but an inspiration," Ellie summarized. "We show people how to do this themselves rather than just coming to see what we did." The committee voted unanimously to pursue this approach. Within weeks, they'd created a website sharing resources, best practices, and connections to experts who'd helped with the train car restoration. The response was immediate and overwhelming emails from across the country about abandoned structures that could be saved, communities that wanted to replicate Millbrook's success. One email stood out. It was from a group in West Virginia who'd found an abandoned carousel in a defunct amusement park. They wanted to restore it as a community center, but didn't know where to start. Caleb found himself on long phone calls with them, sharing everything he'd learned about dealing with rust, rot, and bureaucracy. "You're becoming a movement leader," Jennifer told him during a Sunday visit. She was showing now her pregnancy suit, her bringing a glow that reminded Caleb painfully and beautifully of Margaret at the same stage with Marcus. "I'm just sharing what I learned the hard way," Caleb said. "That's what leaders do," Marcus said. "They go first and light the path for others." The comparison made Caleb uncomfortable. He'd never seen himself as a leader, just a man trying to survive grief through work. But perhaps that's what most leadership was, people stumbling forward and discovering others were following. April brought a celebration nobody had expected. Mike's nephew, an electrician who'd helped with the train car's wiring, proposed to his girlfriend in the clearing, the train car lit with hundreds of candles for the occasion. She said yes, and they asked if they could hold their wedding there in June. "First train car wedding," Mike said proudly. "This ought to be something." The request prompted Caleb to make more improvements. He and Marcus built a proper platform beside the train car that could serve as a dance floor or stage. Jennifer and Ellie planted a garden specifically designed for wedding photos. Sarah coordinated with local vendors to create wedding packages that would benefit multiple businesses. But the real surprise came when going through more of the train car's hidden compartments to create storage space. Behind a panel in what had been the mail car section, Caleb found a leather satchel containing letters from the 1950s. They were correspondence between a railroad executive and his daughter, who'd eloped against his wishes. The letters traced a heartbreaking arc: anger, rejection, gradual softening, eventual reconciliation. The final letter, dated December 1958, was from the daughter. "Thank you for giving James a chance, Daddy. Thank you for choosing love over pride. Our son will know his grandfather because you were brave enough to forgive." Caleb read that line over and over. Brave enough to forgive. He thought about his own journey with Marcus, how close they'd come to permanent estrangement. Forgiveness as an act of courage rather than weakness. It reframed everything. He shared the letters with Marcus during their next visit. They sat in the train car as rain drummed on the metal roof, reading together in companionable silence. "We almost lost this," Marcus said finally. "What we have now. We almost let it slip away." "But we didn't," Caleb said. "That's what matters." "I want my child to know you," Marcus said. "Really know you. Not just as grandfather, but as the man who rebuilt himself along with this train car." The wedding in June transformed the clearing into something from a fairy tale. White lights strung through trees, wildflowers, and mason jars, the train car serving as the most unique backdrop anyone had seen. The bride arrived on the restored handcar pumped down the short track by her brothers. The ceremony itself took place on the new platform with the mountains as witness. Trevor served as unofficial photographer, having developed skill with a camera Rebecca had left him. He captured moments others might miss: the flower girl chasing butterflies, elderly guests wiping tears, Mike dancing with his wife of 40 years. "You've got an eye," the official photographer told Trevor. "Ever think about doing this professionally?" "Maybe," Trevor said, but Caleb saw the spark of possibility in his eyes. The wedding's success led to more requests. By July, they had bookings through the following year. Caleb was initially resistant. This wasn't what he'd envisioned for the train car. But Ellie made a compelling argument. "Every wedding brings families together," she said. "Isn't that what this place is about? Connection, celebration, marking life's important moments." She was right, of course. And the wedding revenue would help maintain the property fund, the educational programs, keep the train car viable for generations. It was during the third wedding of the summer that Caleb noticed something wrong with Trevor. The boy, though at 13 he was hardly a boy anymore, was quieter than usual, distracted, missing his usual enthusiasm. When Caleb asked if everything was okay, Trevor shrugged and mumbled something about being tired. But mothers know, and Ellie was worried. "He's been like this for weeks," she confided to Caleb. "Won't talk to me about it. Maybe he'd open up to you." Caleb found Trevor sitting alone in the train car one evening, Morrison's journal open but unread in his lap. Want to talk about it? Caleb asked, settling into the opposite seat. Trevor was quiet for so long Caleb thought he wouldn't answer. Then in a rush, kids at school say I spend too much time here. Say I'm weird for caring about old stuff. Say I'm trying to be someone I'm not. Caleb remembered his own teenage years, the desperate need to fit in the fear of being different. You know what Morrison wrote about being a porter? Caleb said. He said the hardest part wasn't the long hours or difficult passengers. It was his own family not understanding why he loved the railroad. They wanted him to take a factory job, something steady and normal. What did he do? He followed his passion, and because he did, we have this journal, this history, this connection to the past. Imagine if he'd given in to what others expected. But it's hard, Trevor said, his voice cracking with emotion as much as adolescence. Being different. Everything worth doing is hard, Caleb said. You think restoring this train car was easy? You think rebuilding my relationship with Marcus was easy? The easy path is usually the wrong path. Trevor looked around the train car, taking in every carefully restored detail. I don't want to give this up. This place, these stories, they matter to me. Then don't give them up. The people who matter will understand. The ones who don't weren't your people anyway. That conversation marked a turning point for Trevor. He started a history club at school, bringing classmates to the train car for meetings. Some came to mock, but stayed out of genuine interest. By summer's end, the club had 15 members and was planning a restoration project of their own, an old caboose sitting abandoned behind the defunct train station. August brought challenges of a different sort. The documentary Rebecca had been working on was accepted to several film festivals, with the premiere scheduled for September in Asheville. She wanted Caleb, Trevor, and other key figures to attend to participate in panel discussions about community restoration. I don't do public speaking, Caleb protested. You teach children every week, Rebecca countered. You lead tours, coordinate volunteers. You're already a public speaker. But speaking to locals who'd become friends was different from addressing strangers in a theater. The thought terrified him. Yet Trevor was excited about the opportunity, and Caleb didn't want to disappoint him. Marcus and Jennifer attended the premiere with them. Jennifer, now heavily pregnant but determined to be there. The theater was packed, a mix of film industry people, academics studying rural renewal, and locals curious about how their story had been shaped. Watching the documentary was surreal for Caleb. Rebecca had crafted a narrative that was both personal and universal, showing how one man's grief had transformed into community healing. There he was on screen, covered in rust and sweat, working on the train car. There was the first community dinner, the ice storm response, the wedding celebrations. But what struck him most were the interviews with others. Sarah talking about how the train car had saved her diner by bringing in customers. Mike describing how working on the restoration had helped him process his own retirement depression. Harold saying the weekly tours gave him purpose after his wife's death. I didn't know, Caleb whispered to Marcus. I didn't realize it meant so much to so many people. You were too busy working to notice, Marcus whispered back. But we all saw it. The panel discussion afterward was less terrifying than expected. Questions focused on practical matters, funding, organization, dealing with resistance. Trevor spoke eloquently about the importance of preserving history for younger generations. His confidence and articulation drew impressed murmurs from the audience. That young man has a future in whatever he chooses, an elderly professor told Ellie afterward. You've raised someone special. Caleb helped raise him too, Ellie said, taking Caleb's hand publicly for the first time. It takes a village, and sometimes that village centers around a train car. The documentary's release online in September brought a tsunami of attention. The story went viral, shared millions of times with comments from around the world. People shared their own stories of restoration, of community building, of finding purpose in preservation. But the most meaningful response came in a handwritten letter from Walter Warren's last surviving friend, a 93-year-old man in Detroit who'd known Caleb's grandfather. Walter always said that land would mean something someday, he wrote. He'd be so proud knowing his grandson finally built his dream, just in a different form than expected. You honored him by honoring the past while building the future. Caleb read the letter sitting in the conductor's chair as autumn painted the mountains in flame colors. Through the windows, he could see Trevor and his history club working on their caboose project, Marcus and Jennifer photographing the train car for their baby announcement, Ellie leading a group of women in planning the harvest festival. The clearing that had been empty 18 months ago now thrummed with life. The train car that had been rust and ruin now gleamed with purpose. The man who'd arrived broken was, if not healed, then healing surrounded by love he'd never expected to find again. October arrived with its crisp air and golden light, and with it came the next generation. Jennifer went into labor on a spectacular autumn day, the mountains ablaze with color. Caleb paced the hospital waiting room, remembering doing the same when Marcus was born, but then he'd been young and terrified. Now he was older still, terrified, but in a different way, afraid of not being enough, of failing this grandchild the way he'd sometimes failed Marcus. The baby was a girl, healthy and perfect, with Jennifer's eyes and Marcus's stubborn chin. They named her Margaret Rose for the grandmother she'd never meet, but whose spirit had made this moment possible. Holding his granddaughter for the first time, Caleb felt something shift inside him. Tectonic plates of grief and joy grinding against each other until they found a new configuration. Margaret Rose's tiny fingers wrapped around his calloused thumb, and he understood that this was what Margaret had wanted, not for him to forget her, but to keep living, keep loving, keep building. "Tell her about the train car, Dad," Marcus said, watching his father with his daughter. "Tell her the story." So Caleb began, his voice soft and steady, telling Margaret Rose about a broken man and a broken train car, about restoration and redemption, about community and courage. The baby slept through it all, but Caleb knew these stories would be part of her foundation, the mythology of her family, the legacy of persistence she'd inherit. The Harvest Festival 2 weeks later became a celebration not just of the season, but of new life. Margaret Rose was passed from arm to arm, blessed by the community that had formed around her grandfather's unlikely dream. The train car was decorated with corn stalks and pumpkins, looking like something from a Norman Rockwell painting. Trevor had organized a historical presentation about harvest traditions on the railroad, complete with period music and food. His history club performed a short play about Morrison and the other porters, bringing tears to many eyes with their earnest portrayal of dignity and difficult circumstances. "You've started something," Rebecca told Caleb. She'd returned to film a follow-up segment, impressed by how the story had continued evolving. "This isn't just about restoration anymore. It's about reimagining what American community can be." But Caleb was too busy bouncing his granddaughter to think about larger implications. Margaret Rose had given him something he hadn't had since Margaret's death, a future that demanded his presence. He couldn't check out, couldn't give up, couldn't stop building. This child would need stories, guidance, a grandfather who showed her that broken things could be made beautiful. As evening fell and the festival wound down, Caleb stood in the doorway of the train car, watching the life that swirled around it. Mike and Sarah were planning winter programs. Trevor was teaching younger kids about the handcar. Marcus and Jennifer were showing Margaret Rose her future playground. Ellie was beside him, her hand in his, solid and real and present. "You did it," she said softly. "You brought Walter's dream to life." "We did it," he corrected. "All of us. And we're not done." She was right, he had done it, but not in any way he could have imagined when he'd first seen that rusty hulk in an Ohio field. He'd thought he was just buying a project to fill empty hours. Instead, he'd purchased possibility, community, redemption. The train car sat in its clearing, no longer a relic, but a living thing, breathing with the stories it contained and the stories yet to come. Somewhere James Morrison's spirit surely smiled, knowing his beloved car had found its purpose. Again, not carrying people across physical distance, but across the distances between each other, between past and future, between despair and hope. As the last visitors departed and quiet settled over the clearing, Caleb walked around the train car one more time, running his hands along its restored sides, feeling the smooth paint over what had been rust, the solid wood where there had been rot. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new visitors, new stories to add to the collection. But tonight, with his granddaughter sleeping in the train car's warmth, his son and daughter-in-law chatting softly, Ellie and Trevor cleaning up from the festival, Caleb felt the kind of peace that comes not from endings, but from continuations. The train car had carried so many to their destinations over its working life. Now stationary in a mountain clearing, it continued that work in a different way, helping people find their way home to each other, to themselves, to the communities they could build when they stopped running and started restoring. The stars came out above the mountains, the same stars Walter had seen when he'd first walked this land dreaming of what he might build. The dream had taken an unexpected form, had waited 3 generations to manifest, but it had arrived at last. Not as a house, but as a home, not as a building, but as a rebuilding, not as a destination, but as a journey that continued with each sunrise, each visitor, each story, shared in the warm glow of the train car's lights. Winter arrived with unusual ferocity that year November, bringing snows that typically waited until January. Caleb woke one morning to find the train car buried to its windows. The clearing transformed into an Arctic landscape that seemed to erase all evidence of human habitation. For a moment, standing at the frosted window with Margaret Rose sleeping in the small crib Marcus had built, he felt the weight of isolation pressing against the glass. But isolation was impossible now. Within hours, Mike's tractor was plowing the road Sarah was calling to check if he needed supplies, and Trevor was trudging through the snow with a backpack full of schoolwork, determined not to miss his afternoon session helping with the archives Caleb had been organizing. "Mom says the roads are dangerous," Trevor announced, stomping snow from his boots. "But I told her historical preservation doesn't stop for weather." The boy had grown another 2 inches, and his voice had finally settled into a deeper register, but his enthusiasm for the train car remained undimmed. He'd been working on a comprehensive history of car 2847, tracing its roots through old railroad records, even finding a manifest from 1924 that listed James Morrison as crew. "Look at this," Trevor said excitedly, pulling out a photocopy. Morrison worked the Chicago to San Francisco route. This car carried mail during the Christmas season of 1925. There was a famous blizzard that year, and they got stuck for 3 days in Nebraska. Morrison wrote about it in his journal, but now we have the official record too. Caleb studied the document, marveling at Trevor's detective work. The boy had developed real research skills, spending hours in libraries and online archives building a story from scattered pieces of evidence. "You should be the one writing the book about this place," Caleb said. Trevor's face lit up. "Really? You think I could?" "I think you already are." That conversation planted a seed that would grow through the winter months. Trevor began organizing his research into chapters, creating what he called the complete history of Pullman car 2847. Ellie helped with editing, Marcus provided technical assistance with digital archiving, and Jennifer designed a potential cover featuring the train car in all 4 seasons. The project gave focus to the long winter evenings. The train car became a writing workshop, with Trevor reading chapters aloud to whoever was present, accepting critiques and suggestions with remarkable maturity. Even Margaret Rose seemed to listen, her infant eyes tracking Trevor's animated gestures as he described 19th century railroad construction or the social dynamics of porter service. One December evening, with snow falling steadily outside, Trevor read a particularly moving passage about a Christmas journey Morrison had described when the train car had carried a group of orphans to adoptive families in California. Morrison had written about decorating the car with paper chains the children made about the porter staff, pooling money to buy small gifts, about the mix of sadness and hope that permeated the journey. "Every child deserves to be chosen," Trevor read from Morrison's journal. "To be wanted. These brave little souls heading towards strangers who will become family remind me that love isn't always about blood. It's about choice, commitment, the decision to care for another human being, regardless of origin." Caleb glanced at Ellie, saw tears on her cheeks. Trevor had never talked much about his father, but Caleb knew the man had left when Trevor was 3, had chosen absence over presence. The boy's connection to Morrison's words ran deeper than historical interest. "That's beautiful, honey," Ellie said, pulling Trevor close. "Really beautiful." Morrison understood, Trevor said quietly. He understood that families are made, not just born. The truth of that statement resonated through the train car. Here they all were, Caleb and Marcus reconnecting after years of distance, Jennifer bringing new love to their fractured family, Margaret Rose beginning her story, Trevor and Ellie, who had become essential to Caleb's life in ways he was only beginning to acknowledge. Christmas approached with elaborate preparations. The documentary's success had brought financial stability to the train car project through donations and increased tour bookings, allowing Caleb to plan something special. He commissioned a local blacksmith to create a period-appropriate bell for the train car, something that would have been standard equipment in Morrison's day. The bell arrived on December 20th, a work of art in brass and iron with 2,847 inches engraved on its surface. When Mike helped mount it and Caleb pulled the cord for the first time, the clear tone rang across the clearing and echoed off the mountains. Margaret Rose, now 3 months old, startled at the sound, then laughed a bubbling joy that made everyone smile. "Every train car needs a bell," Mike said, "for warnings, arrivals, celebrations." "For calling people home," Ellie added softly, her hand finding Caleb's. The bell would ring every evening at sunset that winter, a ritual that began spontaneously but became tradition. Locals said they could hear it a mile away on clear nights, a reminder that the train car was there, that community persisted despite cold and darkness. But 3 days before Christmas, crisis arrived in the form of a registered letter. The State Highway Department was planning to widen the road that ran past Caleb's property, a project that would require taking a 30-foot strip of land through eminent domain. The proposed path would destroy the gardens, remove dozens of trees, and bring heavy traffic within yards of the train car. "They can't do this," Marcus said, reading the letter for the 5th time. "We'll fight it." "With what money?" Caleb asked, feeling the old despair creeping back. "Government has infinite resources. We have a bell and good intentions." But Jennifer, practical despite being exhausted from new motherhood, had other ideas. "We have something better. We have public opinion. Remember what happened with the documentary? People care about this place now. Let's make them hear about it." The campaign began immediately. Rebecca, contacted in Los Angeles, used her media connections to spread the word. Trevor wrote a passionate blog post that went viral within hours. The state representative who'd attended the Harvest Festival was bombarded with calls from constituents. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell and the train car glowed with candles for the traditional gathering, a news crew arrived to cover the story. They interviewed Caleb standing in front of the train car, Margaret Rose, in his arms, the bell visible over his shoulder. "This isn't just about one train car or one piece of land," he said, finding eloquence in his anger. "It's about whether communities have the right to preserve what matters to them or whether everything has to be sacrificed for someone else's idea of progress." The segment aired that night, reaching hundreds of thousands of viewers spending quiet Christmas Eves at home. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The Highway Department's phone system crashed from call volume. The governor's office issued a statement saying they were reviewing the situation, but it was a different kind of support that mattered most. On Christmas morning, cars began arriving at the clearing despite the snow. Neighbors, friends, strangers who'd been moved by the story, all coming to stand with Caleb. By noon, over 200 people filled the clearing, their presence a declaration that this place mattered. Harold, the elderly railroad retiree, stood with his oxygen tank, having insisted his son drive him up despite the weather. "I worked 43 years for the railroad," he announced to the crowd. "Watched them tear down stations, rip up tracks, erase history piece by piece. Not this time. This train car stays." The crowd erupted in cheers. Someone started singing, "This land is your land," and soon everyone joined in, their voices carrying across the snow-covered mountains. The news crew, which had returned to film the protest, captured it all: the diverse crowd, the decorated train car, the baby being passed from arm to arm, like a symbol of the future they were protecting. The Highway Department backed down within a week. The official statement cited community input and historical significance, but everyone knew it was the public pressure that had made the difference. The road would be widened on the other side, away from Caleb's property. "You did it," Ellie said as they watched the news report about the decision. "We all did it," Caleb corrected. "That's the only way anything important gets done." January brought a different kind of attention. A publisher who'd seen Trevor's blog posts reached out with interest in his book about the train car. They wanted to expand it, include more about the restoration and community building, make it a young adult narrative, nonfiction title. "A real book," Trevor kept saying, disbelief coloring his voice. "My book actually published." The contract negotiations were handled by Jennifer's cousin, a literary attorney who worked for reduced fees in exchange for being able to bring her children to the train car programs. Trevor would receive an advance that, while modest, was more money than he'd ever imagined having. More importantly, his work would reach audiences far beyond Millbrook. "You're going to be a published author at 14, Caleb told him. "That's extraordinary." "You taught me that ordinary things can become extraordinary with enough work," Trevor replied. "The train car proved that." The book project consumed the rest of winter, with Trevor conducting formal interviews, gathering photographs, working with a professional editor via video calls. Caleb watched him transform from an enthusiastic boy into a serious young writer, taking criticism professionally, revising, endlessly fighting for his vision when necessary. One afternoon, as Trevor worked at the small desk Caleb had built into the train car, Ellie sat beside Caleb watching their sons, for that's what Trevor had become to him, a son of the heart, if not blood. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. "Trevor's father reached out. He wants to reconnect, says he's changed, been in therapy, wants to be part of Trevor's life again." Caleb felt his chest tighten. "What does Trevor want?" "He doesn't know yet. I haven't told him. I wanted to talk to you first." "Why me?" Ellie turned to face him fully. "Because you're the father figure he chose. Because your opinion matters to him more than anyone's. Because we're a family now, whether we've said it out loud or not." The words hung in the air like morning mist. Caleb thought about Marcus, about the years lost to misunderstanding and distance, about the reconciliation that had seemed impossible but wasn't. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he said finally. "But Trevor gets to set the terms. He's old enough to decide what he needs." When told about his father's request, Trevor was quiet for a long time. He walked around the train car, running his hands along surfaces he'd helped restore before speaking. "I'll meet him," he said. "Once? Here? This is my place, my territory. If he really wants to know me, he needs to see what matters to me." The meeting happened on a February afternoon, with Caleb and Ellie present for support. Trevor's father, Daniel, was younger than Caleb had expected, worn down by his own struggles, but seemingly sincere in his desire to reconnect. "This is incredible," Daniel said, looking around the train car. "You helped build this." "Caleb built it," Trevor said firmly. "I just helped. Like I help with lots of things here. This is my real home." The conversation was stilted, careful, but not hostile. Daniel asked questions Trevor answered with measured honesty. When Daniel suggested regular visits, Trevor counterproposed occasional emails, maybe monthly phone calls, seeing where things went from there. "I'm not saying no forever," Trevor told his father, "but I'm not saying yes to everything either. I've got a good life here. You left that life. If you want back in, you earn it slowly." After Daniel left, Trevor collapsed into Caleb's arms, sobbing with the relief of someone who'd faced their fears and survived. Caleb held him, remembering holding Marcus at similar moments, understanding that fatherhood was less about biology than presence, patience, and persistent love. Spring arrived with news that would change everything again. The State Historical Commission, impressed by the documentation Trevor had compiled, and the community support demonstrated during the highway fight, designated the train car and surrounding property as an official historical site. This brought not just recognition, but funding grants for maintenance, educational programs, and even expansion. "We could build a proper museum," Sarah suggested at a community meeting, "not to replace the train car experience, but to complement it." Plans emerged for a visitor center that would house Trevor's archives, display artifacts donated by railroad families, and provide space for educational programs. But more than that, it would be a community space, a place for meetings, celebrations, and the ongoing work of binding Millbrook together. The groundbreaking ceremony in April drew attendees from across the state. The lieutenant governor spoke about preservation and progress coexisting. Rebecca screened a short film about the train car's impact. Trevor, now 15 and growing into his confidence, read from Morrison's journal about the importance of remembering where we came from while moving toward where we're going. But the most moving moment came when Constance Williams, whose father had been a porter alongside Morrison, presented the museum with her father's complete uniform and a collection of photographs showing life aboard the train cars in their heyday. "My father would be so proud," she said, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Not just that the car was saved, but that it's being used to teach truth, to build community, to show that America's real strength has always been our ability to come together despite our differences." As construction began on the visitor center, life in and around the train car continued its rhythms. Margaret Rose took her first steps, gripping the restored handrails, her delighted laughter filling the space. Marcus and Jennifer bought a house in Millbrook, just a mile from the train car, close enough for daily visits. Trevor's book entered final production with a launch planned for fall. One evening in May, as the sun set behind the mountains and the bell rang its daily call, Caleb found himself alone in the train car for the first time in months. He sat in Morrison's chair looking at how far they'd all come. The man who'd arrived here, broken and alone, was gone, replaced by someone he barely recognized, a grandfather, a teacher, a partner, a father figure, a community leader. But fragments of that broken man remained like the patches of original paint still visible on the train car's walls. The grief for Margaret hadn't disappeared. It had transformed into something bearable, even beautiful, woven into the fabric of new love and continued life. Ellie found him there as he'd known she would. She sat beside him, their hands intertwining naturally, two people who'd found each other in the shadow of loss and built something neither had expected. "Daniel called," she said. "He wants to come to Trevor's book launch. He's been reading all his blog posts, says he's proud of him." "That's good," Caleb said. "Trevor needs to know his father sees his worth." "You gave him that worth," Ellie said. "You showed him he mattered." "He always mattered. I just gave him space to discover it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching darkness settle over the clearing where the visitor center's foundation was taking shape. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more small victories. But tonight in the train car that had become the heart of something larger than anyone had imagined, peace reigned. Summer brought completion of the visitor center and Trevor's book simultaneously. The publisher arranged for the launch to happen at the new building, a perfect synthesis of old and new. The modern structure, designed to echo the train car's lines, housed state-of-the-art displays while maintaining the warmth that characterized everything about the project. The launch event drew hundreds. Trevor, dressed in his fursuit, read excerpts with a professionalism that belied his age. The book itself was beautiful, hardbound with photographs documenting the restoration maps of the train car's historical routes, and Trevor's engaging narrative weaving past and present together. "This book," Trevor said in his speech, "isn't just about a train car. It's about what happens when people decide something matters enough to save it. It's about second chances for objects and people both. It's about my grandfather, Caleb." He paused, glancing at Caleb with eyes full of emotion, because that's what he is to me, showing me that the best families are the ones we choose to build. The word grandfather hit Caleb like a physical force. Trevor had never called him that before. Across the room he saw Daniel, nodding, no jealousy in his expression, just acceptance that his son had found what he needed when Daniel couldn't provide it. After the speeches, as people mingled and bought books for Trevor to sign, Margaret Rose toddled through the crowd, her chubby hands reaching for everything. She'd started calling Caleb Pop Pop, a name that made his heart simultaneously break and soar every time he heard it. "Pop Pop," she called now, running to him with Trevor's book clutched upside down in her hands. "Story." He lifted her, this grandchild who would grow up knowing only the rebuilt version of him, who would take for granted the community that had been so hard won. She would play in the train car as naturally as other children played in backyards, would consider Trevor her uncle and Ellie her grandmother, without questioning the lack of blood ties. "This is your story too," he told her, though she was too young to understand. "All of this is your story." Fall arrived with its familiar glory, the mountains exploding in color that drew even more tourists than usual. The visitor center had exceeded all projections, requiring additional volunteers to manage tours and programs. Trevor, flush with success from his book, had started a youth docent program training other teenagers to share the train car's story. One October afternoon, Caleb was preparing for a school group when Mike arrived with unexpected news. "Remember Carl Davidson?" Mike asked. "He's back in town. Bought the old Millbrook Hotel, says he's going to restore it." Caleb felt the old tension return. Davidson had nearly destroyed everything they'd built with his harassment and lawsuits. His return couldn't mean anything good, but when Davidson appeared at the train car the next day, he looked different. Older, diminished somehow. He stood at the entrance, clearly uncomfortable, before speaking. "I came to apologize," he said simply, "and to ask for your help." Caleb said nothing, waiting. "I was wrong," Davidson continued. "I saw this place as competition, as a threat to my plans. But I've spent the last year watching what you built here, seeing how it brought life back to Millbrook. I want to be part of that, not fight against it. Why should I believe you? Caleb asked. Davidson pulled out architectural plans. The hotel restoration. I want to do it right like you did here. Historical accuracy, community involvement, adding to Millbrook's character instead of destroying it. I need your advice, your methods. I'm willing to pay consulting fees, donate to the museum, whatever it takes. Caleb studied the plans, saw that Davidson had indeed learned something. The proposed restoration honored the hotel's 1890s origins while adding modern amenities discreetly. It would bring jobs, tourist dollars, and renewed life to downtown. I'll think about it, Caleb said. That's more than I deserve, Davidson replied, leaving the plans behind. The decision tormented Caleb for days. Part of him wanted to refuse to punish Davidson for the pain he'd caused. But watching Trevor lead a tour, seeing him explain how the train car taught lessons about forgiveness and second chances, Caleb knew what he had to do. He agreed to consult on the hotel restoration, but with conditions. Local workers would be hired first. The Historical Society would have oversight. Profits would be shared with community development projects. Davidson agreed to everything. The collaboration was awkward at first, but gradually became productive. Davidson had resources Caleb lacked, while Caleb had earned the community's trust. Together, they began planning not just a hotel restoration, but a broader revitalization of Millbrook's historic downtown. Never thought I'd see you two working together, Mike commented, watching Caleb and Davidson discuss architectural details. People change, Caleb said. Sometimes they just need the right example. As November arrived with its first snows, the train car entered its third winter as a restored space. But now it was just one part of a larger revival. The hotel project had sparked other restorations. Empty storefronts were being renovated. Young families were moving to Millbrook, drawn by its community spirit and lower costs. One evening, as Caleb helped Trevor prepare for a presentation about the train car at a national preservation conference, the young man said something that stopped him cold. You know what the real miracle is, Trevor said. It's not the train car. It's that you were brave enough to be broken in public. Most people hide their damage. You turned yours into something everyone could learn from. Caleb thought about that observation as he walked home through the early winter darkness, the train car's lights glowing behind him. Trevor was right. He'd been so broken that hiding it was impossible, so he'd simply worked in full view of everyone, letting them see the restoration of both man and train car simultaneously. That transparency had given others permission to acknowledge their own brokenness to begin their own restorations. Harold had started a support group for widowers that met in the visitor center. Sarah had opened up about her struggles with depression, finding help she'd been too proud to seek before. Even Davidson's apology had come from recognizing his own damaged motivations. The train car had become a symbol not of perfection, but of the possibility hidden in imperfection, the beauty that could emerge from ruins, if people were willing to do the work. December brought the third anniversary of Caleb's arrival in Millbrook. The community organized a surprise celebration, filling the train car with people whose lives had been touched by its restoration. There were couples who'd married their children who'd discovered history through its programs, elderly residents who'd found purpose in volunteering, newcomers who'd moved to Millbrook because of what the train car represented. Marcus gave a speech that left no dry eyes. 3 years ago, I thought I'd lost my father to grief. Instead, I discovered he'd become the father he'd always wanted to be: present, engaged, building something that mattered. This train car saved him, and in saving him, it saved us all. Trevor presented Caleb with the first royalty check from his book, insisting it go toward train car maintenance. None of this exists without you, he said. My book, my future, my understanding of what family really means. But it was Ellie who provided the evening's biggest surprise. Standing before everyone, she pulled out a simple gold ring. Caleb Warren, she said, her voice strong despite her tears. You restored this train car with patience, love, and endless work. You restored my faith that good men exist. You gave my son a father and me a partner. I'm not proposing marriage. We're not quite ready for that. But I am proposing commitment, partnership, a promise that we'll continue building this life together. Will you accept this ring as a symbol of that promise? Caleb couldn't speak. He nodded, letting her slip the ring onto his right hand, pulling her close as the crowd erupted in celebration. It wasn't a wedding, but it was a declaration that love could come again, that families could be chosen, that broken hearts could be rebuilt stronger than before. As the celebration continued around them, Caleb stepped outside into the cold December night. The train car glowed from within, laughter and music spilling from its windows. The visitor center stood ready for tomorrow's school groups. The hotel renovation was proceeding on schedule. Trevor's book was being adapted for a television series. Margaret Rose was learning her first words, including train and pop-pop and home. 3 years ago, he'd stood in an Ohio field looking at a rusted relic, seeing in it a project that might fill empty days. He'd had no idea he was looking at his salvation, at the vessel that would carry him from grief to joy, from isolation to community, from ending to beginning. The bell rang midnight, its bronze voice carrying across the mountains. Inside, someone started singing Auld Lang Syne, though New Year's was still weeks away. Caleb rejoined the celebration, taking Margaret Rose from Jennifer's arms, dancing with her, to the old song while she giggled and grabbed at his beard. "Should old acquaintance be forgot?" he sang softly to his granddaughter, thinking of Margaret, of Morrison, of Walter, of all the ghosts that had guided him here. They weren't forgotten. They were woven into every board of the train car, every gathering in the clearing, every life touched by this unlikely resurrection. The train car rocked slightly in the winter wind as if remembering its traveling days, but it was anchored now, permanent, a fixed point around which a community could orbit. It had carried countless passengers to their destinations over its working life. Now stationary but more vital than ever, it continued that essential work, bringing people home. The new year began with a crisis that threatened everything they'd built. A massive winter storm larger than any in recent memory swept through the mountains with winds that sounded like freight trains. Caleb woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of metal screaming against metal, the entire train car shuddering as if trying to remember its traveling days. Through the window, illuminated by lightning, he saw devastation. The visitor center's roof was partially torn away, its modern materials no match for nature's fury. Trees were falling like dominoes, their massive trunks crashing down around the clearing. One ancient oak, probably 200 years old, fell directly across the access road, its root system pulling up earth like a giant hand clawing at the sky. The power was out, phones were dead, and the train car itself was groaning under the assault. A window shattered suddenly, sending glass across the floor where Margaret Rose's toys were scattered from her visit the day before. Caleb stuffed blankets into the opening, his hands bleeding from small cuts, the wind still finding ways to invade. When dawn finally came, revealing the full extent of damage, Caleb stood in his doorway and felt the old despair returning. Everything they'd worked for, everything they'd built, lay in ruins around the train car, which itself had survived but was now isolated in a sea of destruction. Mike arrived on foot, having hiked 3 miles through the devastation, when roads proved impassable. His face told the story before his words did. "It's bad everywhere," he said. "But this... Caleb, I'm so sorry." Together they assessed the damage. The visitor center would need major repairs. The gardens were destroyed, buried under fallen trees. The small stage where concerts and weddings were held was completely gone, scattered across the clearing in splinters. Worst of all, the train car itself, while structurally intact, had sustained significant damage. Windows, broken siding torn loose, the beautiful bell knocked from its mounting and lying dented in the mud. "Insurance will cover some of it," Mike said, trying to sound optimistic. "Not enough," Caleb replied, knowing the truth. Insurance never covered enough, and the deductibles alone would drain their reserves. They were looking at months of work, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that was assuming they could even get contractors in a region where every building had sustained damage. Trevor arrived later that morning, with Ellie, both of them crying at the devastation. The boy walked through the wreckage of the visitor center where his carefully organized archives were soaked and scattered, his research of years potentially destroyed. "We can't fix this," Trevor said, his voice hollow. "It's too much." It was the first time Caleb had heard him admit defeat, and it hurt worse than the physical destruction. If Trevor's faith was broken, what hope did they have? But then Margaret Rose's voice cut through the despair. Marcus and Jennifer had arrived, the baby in Marcus's arms, and she was pointing at the train car with delight. Train Pop-Pop's train, she said, oblivious to the destruction, seeing only what remained rather than what was lost. That child's perspective shifted something in Caleb. Yes, there was massive damage. Yes, it would take enormous effort to rebuild. But the train car itself stood. The core of what they'd created survived. They'd started with less and built everything. They could do it again. She's right, Caleb said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The train car is still here. We rebuilt it from complete ruin. We can rebuild the rest. But how? Ellie asked. The whole region is devastated. Everyone needs help. The same way we did it the first time, Caleb replied. Together, one piece at a time. The rebuilding began that very day, but it started in an unexpected way. Rather than focusing on their own damage, Caleb organized work crews to help neighbors. The train car, being one of the few structures with minimal damage, became a relief center. The wood stove provided heat, the kitchen served hot meals, the main space became a shelter for families whose homes were uninhabitable. Sarah, whose diner had lost its roof, set up her cooking operation in the train car's kitchen. If this place could survive the storm, she said, it's meant to be used. Within days, the train car was serving 100 meals daily. People who'd come for help stayed to help others. The clearing, despite its devastation, became the organizational hub for regional recovery efforts. The State Emergency Management Office, impressed by the grassroots efficiency, began routing supplies through what they called the Millbrook model. Carl Davidson appeared on the fourth day leading a convoy of trucks from his construction company. I know we agreed I'd hire local for the hotel, he said, but right now my crews are yours. No charge. This community saved me from my worst impulses. Time to repay that debt. His crews worked 18-hour days clearing roads, patching roofs, making homes habitable. Davidson himself worked alongside them, his expensive clothes replaced with work gear, his soft hands developing the same blisters Caleb had earned during the original restoration. But it was Trevor who provided the most unexpected solution to their financial crisis. His publisher, moved by photos of the destruction he'd posted online, organized a fundraising campaign called Rebuild the Train Car's Home. The story of the storm's damage to the symbol of community resilience struck a chord nationally. Donations poured in from readers of Trevor's book, viewers of the documentary, people who'd never visited but felt connected to the story. A famous railroad enthusiast, a tech billionaire who collected vintage trains, sent a check that made everyone gasp. I've been following your story, his note read. What you've built transcends monetary value, but money can help rebuild it. Use this to make it even better. The funds allowed not just rebuilding, but improvement. The visitor center would be reconstructed with storm-resistant materials. The gardens would be redesigned with native plants that could withstand extreme weather. The train car itself would get storm windows that could protect the historic glass. During the reconstruction, living patterns shifted. Marcus and Jennifer moved into the train car temporarily when their rental house was damaged, bringing Margaret Rose into the daily rhythm of the space. 4 generations, if you counted Caleb as grandfather, to both Trevor and Margaret Rose, lived and worked together in the close quarters, finding harmony and shared purpose. One evening, as rain drummed on the repaired roof, Trevor made an announcement that surprised everyone. I've been accepted to Columbia, he said, holding up the letter. Full scholarship for their journalism program. The train car fell silent. Trevor leaving seemed impossible. He was as much a part of this place as the restored brass fixtures. But, he continued, I've also been accepted to UNC Asheville. Good program, partial scholarship, and I could stay here, keep working on the museum, be part of whatever comes next. You have to go to Columbia, Caleb said immediately. This opportunity is just one opportunity, Trevor interrupted. Being here, being part of this, that's an opportunity too. Different, but not lesser. The debate continued for days. Ellie wanted Trevor to have the best education possible. Marcus argued for the value of prestigious connections. Jennifer pointed out that success could be defined many ways. But it was Daniel Trevor's biological father who provided unexpected wisdom during one of his now regular visits. I left because I thought success was somewhere else, he said. I thought being a good father meant making money, having a career, being important. I missed everything that mattered, chasing things that didn't. Trevor, you're smarter than I was. You know what matters. Trust that knowledge. In the end, Trevor chose UNC Asheville, but with a twist. He negotiated with Columbia to defer enrollment for a year, giving himself time to help with the rebuilding while taking online courses. He would stay connected to the train car while beginning his academic journey. I want to document the rebuilding, he explained. This is the sequel to my book, not just restoration, but resilience. How communities recover, adapt, grow stronger. Spring arrived with the clearing transformed into a construction site. The new visitor center rose from the ruins of the old, its design more organic, seeming to grow from the landscape rather than impose upon it. Gardens took shape with input from a renowned landscape architect who'd volunteered her services after reading about the storm damage. The train car itself received careful restoration, each repair done with even more attention to historical accuracy than the original work. They found a specialist who could remake the bell, not just repairing it, but improving it, adding a resonance that carried even further across the mountains. One April morning, as Caleb worked on installing new storm windows, Harold arrived with news that would change the project's scope entirely. "My grandson works for the Railroad Heritage Foundation," Harold said. "They want to designate this as a National Historic Landmark. Full designation, not just state level. It would mean federal protection, guaranteed funding, and recognition as nationally significant." The application process was complex, requiring documentation that Trevor eagerly provided. His research saved digitally, despite the storm damage to physical copies, proved invaluable. The foundation was particularly impressed by the community involvement, the educational programs, and the way the train car had become a catalyst for regional renewal. The designation ceremony was scheduled for July 4th, Independence Day, seeming appropriate for celebrating this particular kind of American achievement. Officials from Washington would attend along with media from across the country. The pressure to have everything perfect was immense, but perfection proved elusive. 2 weeks before the ceremony, with work crews racing to finish details, Caleb collapsed again. This time it wasn't stress that felled him, but exhaustion. So complete his body simply stopped cooperating. He woke in the hospital to find Ellie, Marcus, and Trevor surrounding his bed, their faces etched with worry. "You're done," the doctor said bluntly. "I don't mean for a few days. I mean, you're done pushing yourself like this. Your heart is showing signs of strain. You keep this up, and you won't see that granddaughter graduate high school." The words hit harder than any storm. Caleb had been so focused on building something lasting that he'd forgotten he needed to last too. The train car, the museum, the community. None of it mattered if he wasn't there to be part of it. "We'll postpone the ceremony," Marcus said immediately. "No," Caleb replied. "This isn't about me. It never was. It's about what we built together. The ceremony happens whether I'm there or not." He was released 3 days before July 4th with strict orders for limited activity. Ellie became his fierce guardian, intercepting anyone who tried to involve him in last-minute preparations. Trevor took over coordination, his natural leadership emerging as he managed volunteers, directed contractors, and handled media inquiries. The morning of the ceremony dawned perfect clear sky, mild temperature, the mountains green and welcoming. Caleb sat in Morrison's chair in the train car, watching through the windows as hundreds of people gathered. There were officials in suits, locals in their best clothes, tourists who'd planned vacations around the event, and media with cameras capturing every angle. Trevor knocked on the train car door. "It's time, Grandpa Caleb." That title still made Caleb's throat tight. He stood carefully, Ellie's hand steadying him, and walked out to face the crowd. The applause started immediately, growing into a standing ovation that continued for minutes. These people weren't clapping for him alone, but for what they'd all accomplished together, for proof that communities could still cohere, that broken things could still be mended. The federal official who presented the landmark designation was a small woman with a powerful voice. "This train car represents more than historical preservation," she said. "It represents the best of American spirit resilience community, the belief that what's broken can be repaired, that what's old can find new purpose." She handed Caleb the bronze plaque, its weight surprising in his weakened hands. Marcus stepped forward to help hold it. Then Trevor joined them, 3 generations united in accepting recognition for their shared work. "Speech," someone called out, and the cry was taken up by the crowd. Caleb hadn't prepared anything, but words came anyway. "4 years ago, I bought this train car because I needed something to do besides grieve," he began, his voice carrying across the clearing. "I thought I was buying a project. Instead, I bought a teacher. This train car taught me that restoration isn't about making something look new. It's about honoring what was while building what could be. He paused, seeing faces in the crowd that had become dear to him. Sarah nodding with tears on her cheeks, Mike grinning broadly, Harold saluting with military precision. Every person here contributed to this restoration. Every hand that helped, every meal shared, every story told became part of what we're celebrating today. This train car is all of ours, and it will continue carrying people not across miles, but across the distances between each other, between past and future, between despair and hope. The celebration continued all day with music, food, and constant tours of the train car. Margaret Rose, now walking confidently, led her own tour for other toddlers, her babbled explanations delighting everyone. The new bell rang every hour, its bronze voice celebrating resilience. As evening approached, Caleb found himself alone again in the train car, the sounds of celebration distant through the windows. He pulled out Morrison's journal, reading the familiar final entry about hope on wheels. Morrison couldn't have imagined this, his workplace becoming a landmark, his words inspiring a community 4 generations later. Ellie found him there as she always did when he needed her most. She sat beside him, their hands finding each other naturally. "Daniel proposed to me," she said quietly. "Not romantically. He knows that ship has sailed. But he wants to be more involved in Trevor's life, wants to move to Millbrook, be part of what we've built here. And I told him yes, but with conditions. He respects what you are to Trevor, what you are to me. He becomes part of the extended family, not a replacement for anyone." Caleb thought about the complexity of modern families, how they could expand and include rather than exclude. "Good," he said. "Trevor deserves all the fathers he can get." "Speaking of which," Ellie said, pulling out an envelope, "this came today addressed to both of us." Inside was an invitation to Marcus and Jennifer's renewal of vows planned for the fall in the train car. A note from Marcus explained, "We want Margaret Rose to remember her parents choosing each other again in the place where our family was rebuilt." Summer passed in a blur of visitors, the national landmark designation drawing more attention than ever. But systems were in place now, trained docents, scheduled tours, sustainable practices that didn't require Caleb's constant involvement. He learned to delegate, to trust others with the daily operations while he focused on what he did best. Sharing stories, teaching children, being present for the small moments that mattered most. Trevor's documentation of the rebuilding became a multimedia project combining writing, photography, and video into an interactive website that drew millions of views. Colleges used it as a case study in community development. Other towns requested consultation on their own restoration projects. One August evening, Trevor showed Caleb a message that had arrived through the website. "It's from Morrison's great-great-granddaughter," Trevor said excitedly. "She lives in Seattle, had no idea the journal existed until she saw a news story. She wants to visit, has more family documents, photos of Morrison we've never seen." The visit was arranged for September. Patricia Morrison was a professor of African American history, and she arrived with boxes of materials that added new dimensions to their understanding of the train car's past. "My family thought these stories were lost," she said, spreading photographs across the table in the visitor center. "To find them preserved, celebrated, taught to children, it's overwhelming." One photograph stopped everyone cold. It showed Morrison and Robert Williams, Constance's father, standing with a white woman and a black woman in front of the train car. The women wore suffragette sashes. "That's my great-great-grandmother," Patricia said, pointing to the black woman. "And that's her friend, Catherine Warren." Caleb's heart stopped. Warren. Patricia consulted her notes. "Yes, Catherine Warren. She was involved in the suffrage movement used to ride the trains organizing rallies. According to family stories, she was married to a railroad investor named Walter Warren." The connection stunned everyone. Caleb's grandmother, whom he'd never known existed, had been friends with Morrison's wife. Their families had been connected long before Caleb found the journal, long before he bought the train car. The threads of history were more intricately woven than anyone had imagined. "It's like it was meant to be," Trevor said softly. "All of it. You finding the train car, the journal, the restoration, all of it leading to this moment when the stories reconnect." Patricia stayed for a week working with Trevor to incorporate the new information into the museum displays. The story of friendship across racial lines during the Jim Crow era, of women fighting for rights while their husbands worked the railroad, added powerful new chapters to the train car's history. The vow renewal in October brought the extended family together in ways that would have seemed impossible 4 years earlier. Marcus and Jennifer stood before the assembled crowd. Margaret rose as flower girl, dropping leaves instead of petals. Daniel served as photographer, his presence no longer awkward but natural. Trevor was best man, his speech about choosing family, bringing tears and laughter in equal measure. This train car, Marcus said in his vows, brought my father back to me. It gave me the chance to know him as he really is not the tired factory worker I remembered, but the dreamer, builder, teacher he was always meant to be. In this place of second chances, I choose again to love, to commit, to believe in the power of restoration. As autumn progressed toward winter, changes came rapidly. The hotel restoration was completed, bringing new life to downtown. Young families continued moving to Millbrook, drawn by its story of renewal. The school board approved funding for expanded history programs centered around the train car. Trevor's multimedia project won a national award for digital storytelling. But the most significant change was personal. One November evening, as the first snow began to fall, Ellie and Caleb stood in the train car surrounded by close family. With no fanfare, no crowd, no ceremony beyond what mattered to them, they exchanged rings and promises. Not a legal marriage, neither felt the need for official recognition, but a commitment witnessed by those who mattered most. "You saved me," Ellie said simply. "When I was drowning in single motherhood and minimum wage jobs and the absence of hope, you threw me a lifeline disguised as a rusty train car." "We saved each other," Caleb replied. "That's what people do when they choose to be family." Trevor stood as witness, this young man who'd grown from a shy boy into a confident storyteller who'd found fathers in unexpected places and learned that love multiplied when shared. Margaret Rose, now 3, and Verbal proclaimed loudly that Pop and Grandma Ellie are getting married in the train, which was close enough to truth. Winter settled over the mountains with a gentleness that felt like blessing after the previous year's storm. The train car, reinforced and weatherproofed, stood solid against the elements. Inside the wood stove, crackled children's artwork decorated the walls, and Morrison's journal rested in its place of honor. One December evening, Caleb sat in the conductor's chair watching Trevor teach a group of younger students about the Porter era. The young man now had Morrison's gift for making history immediate and relevant. In the spring, he would start full-time at UNC Asheville, but he'd already negotiated to continue leading weekend programs at the train car. Mr. Morrison wrote, "Trevor was saying that every journey changes both the travelers and the destination. This train car has taken us all on journeys we never expected to, destinations we couldn't have imagined." Through the windows, Caleb could see the lights of Millbrook spreading up the mountainside, new houses, the restored hotel businesses that had reopened or newly opened. The dying town he'd driven into 4 years ago was gone, replaced by something vital and growing. But more than the physical transformation, there was a spiritual one. People walked differently here now, with purpose and pride. They gathered regularly in the train car, the visitor center, the hotel's community room, maintaining connections that elsewhere were dissolving into digital isolation. They'd learned that community wasn't something that happened automatically, but something that required constant cultivation, like a garden. The bell rang its evening call, the sound carrying across the snow-covered clearing. Soon people would begin arriving for the weekly winter storytelling session where locals shared tales while soup simmered on the wood stove. Harold would tell railroad stories, Sarah would recount Millbrook's history, newcomers would explain what drew them here. But first, Caleb had a moment of solitude to reflect. He pulled out a worn envelope from his pocket. The last letter Margaret had written him, discovered in her jewelry box just last week when they were finally sorting through the last of the Detroit storage unit's contents. "My dearest Caleb," it read, "if you're reading this, I'm gone and you're lost. I know you, my stubborn love. You'll blame yourself for everything, for working too much, loving too quietly, not being enough. Stop it. You were always enough. You just showed love differently through work, through providing, through staying when other men would have left. But now I need you to learn new ways of loving. Love yourself enough to grieve properly. Love others enough to let them in. Love life enough to keep living it. Find something broken And fix it, not because it needs fixing, but because you do. The fixing will fix you. Trust me. Trust love. Trust that endings are also beginnings. All my love, always, Margaret. He'd found the letter while helping Marcus pack up the Detroit house for final sale tucked in a jewelry box with their wedding rings. 4 years after her death, Margaret was still teaching him, still guiding him toward wholeness. She knew, he said aloud to the empty train car. Somehow she knew what I'd need. People began arriving for storytelling, familiar faces made family by shared experience, new faces drawn by curiosity and welcome. Trevor set up chairs, Ellie ladled soup. Marcus and Jennifer settled Margaret Rose with her coloring books. Daniel arrived with his new girlfriend, a teacher at Trevor's school, who'd been drawn to Millbrook by its story of educational innovation. As the train car filled with warmth and voices, Caleb stood to welcome everyone. Looking at the assembled crowd, his family by blood and choice, his community by effort and love, he understood that the train car had completed its most important journey. It had carried him from death to life, from isolation to connection, from ending to endless beginning. Before we start tonight's stories, he said, I want to share something James Morrison wrote that I've never read aloud before. I found it tucked in the back of his journal, almost like he hid it there for someone to find when they were ready. He opened the journal to the last page where Morrison's handwriting was shakier, older. A train car, Caleb read, is just metal and wood until people fill it with their journeys. Then it becomes something more, a vessel for dreams, a bridge between worlds, a home that moves. But sometimes the greatest journey a train car can make is to stop moving, to become fixed, to transform from a vehicle of escape into a foundation for staying. May this car, wherever it ends up, teach someone that the best journeys are the ones that bring us home. The silence that followed was complete, everyone absorbing the prescience of words written a century ago. Then Harold started clapping, and others joined, and soon the train car rang with applause, not for Caleb, but for Morrison, for all the porters and passengers who'd given the car its soul, for the community that had restored both the car and themselves. As stories began to flow, Harold's tale of meeting his wife on a train. Sarah's memory of Millbrook's founding a newcomer's journey from California to Carolina. Caleb settled into his chair. Ellie's hand in his, surrounded by the life they'd built from ruins. Outside, snow fell steadily, blanketing the clearing in pristine white. The train car stood solid and warm against the winter, its lights beaconing through the storm, calling people home. It would stand here for generations. Caleb knew, teaching the same lessons over and over, that broken things could be mended, that strangers could become family, that communities could cohere around shared purpose, that love came in many forms and second chances were always possible. The bell would ring tomorrow morning, as it did every morning, now calling people to work, to gather, to remember, to hope. And people would come as they always did, drawn by something more than curiosity, drawn by the human need for connection, for story, for proof that restoration was possible, not just for objects, but for lives, for communities, for the bruised and beautiful heart of America itself. But tonight, in the warmth of the train car, with stories swirling like smoke from the wood stove, there was only this, a man who'd thought his life was over, surrounded by the life he'd built from that ending. A grandfather, a teacher, a partner, a friend. A restored soul in a restored train car, both of them proof that sometimes the most profound journeys were the ones that brought you home.